Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku had Lady Luck by his side? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The rain seemed to be hitting her more forcefully than anyone else, and she walked blindly through it. The young teen was already accustomed to Mother Nature treating her in this way, so she didn't even bother with an umbrella. With a sigh, she used her moist sleeve to wipe her eyes. I am aware of my bad luck, but really, my shoe did fall upside down this morning, despite the forecast indicating that it would be sunny all day, she thought. A mocking voice exclaimed, "Look out, it's Yoshino. If you go near her you'll get cursed." On the back of the girl's head, an irk mark appeared. Ordinarily, she would simply ignore it. She struggled to confront others. It was actually her least favorite activity, but soon enough, her middle school years were coming to an end, and there were bigger fish to fry when she got home. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and turned back to the bully, smiling. When the bully, who was now known as Kashino, said, "Actually, about that, Kashino, I'm feeling extra lucky today," he found himself backing off. That was usually a bad thing about this girl. With a nervous laugh and his hands raised in surrender, Kashino said, Hey now, it was just a joke, let's not get crazy here." Yoshino grinned, her eyes slightly shaded. "I might as well abandon my plans if I am unable to stand up here." Slapping her hand down on the young man's shoulder, she approached him. "I think I'll share some of my fortune with you. May it follow you all the way home." At that moment, a car passed by and sprayed them both with a mountain of filthy water, turning Kashino's face blue. Nanami let her hand fall, seemingly unfazed by the incident, while he spat and hacked out what had entered his mouth. "Ugh, disgusting, I'm gonna get you for this, Nanami." With a look of satisfaction on her face, Nanami muffled his voice as she made her way home. Her heart was racing frantically. However, given that this was the first time she had done this, it might be wise to flee in case Kashino decided to take revenge. So she did. It took her about 10 minutes of running before she realized he wasn't pursuing her. She let out a sigh of relief and went about her post-school routine. Nanami was certain that the rest of the day would be alright as she hopped over a crack in the sidewalk and petted Kuro, the neighbor's black cat. Completely positive. Then she collapsed in front of her house. The door opened in front of her, and she sat up, rubbing her nose. "OWW, so close," she said. Her father's weary smile met her without a word. With a tentative smile, she glanced down at herself and her sorry state. Her father chuckled and extended a hand, which she accepted with gratitude. If it helps, I totally almost made it here unscathed up until now." He gave her a loving pat on the head and peered out the door, saying, "Really now? That must be a new record for you." He half joked, "Look at that. The rain stopped as soon as you came in." At her father's words, Nanami puffed out her cheek in shock. "Go take a bath before you catch a cold. Also, why is your hair all dirty? You look like a schmuck," he said, laughing uneasily when he saw his joke miss. Nanami went upstairs to freshen up, deciding not to share her earlier encounter with Kashino with her father. Nanami grinned at her ash-blonde hair, which was now clean. She used a dry cloth to wipe her face, admiring her freckles and the fact that her face was generally undamaged. Since there were no injuries, she honestly thought today was a success. She looked around her room and saw the application lying nearby, safely hidden beneath her pillow and out of her black cat's line of sight. Her brown eyes glowed with joy. He hadn't destroyed it. She gave herself an enthusiastic nod in the mirror. Taking the sheet of paper, she said, "That's a good sign. All right then," and cautiously descended the stairs. She started her pitch without even waiting to get to the bottom, where her parents were waiting. She slid down the steps rails with excitement and landed on her feet, saying, "Okay, so you know how you guys asked me what high school I wanted to go to. One more encouraging sign." From her wheelchair, her mother, a lighter blonde version of herself, looked at her excited daughter with astonishment and a hint of concern. Before turning back to Nanami, she glanced at her husband, who was occupied in the kitchen. "Have you already made your choice? There's still time, you know." Carrying the paper behind her back, Nanami dashed into the dining room. Her father stiffened, but she ignored it, concentrating on her mother's worried look. "I've already decided. I want to be a hero, and the only way to do that is to go to a hero school," she said. Nanami nibbled on her lip. Her father entered the room with a frown on his face and wiped his hands with a cloth. The school I want to go to is he said. "Oh," she thought. "Why do they have that look on their faces?" Her chest pounded loudly as her heartbeat accelerated. Do they already know, or have I not yet mentioned it? Can't I go because of this? Sweat was running down her neck as she glanced down at her shoes. Today, I confronted a bully. Heroes do that. I can be a hero. The first step is to speak. She showed her face through her asymmetrical bangs. Her parents tried to keep their expressions more neutral because they could tell she was nervous. It was ineffective. Nanami inhaled and then exhaled. She held out her application, which was completed and prepared for mailing, and said, I want to go to UA. Her mother looked at her brunette husband and pursed her lips. He rubbed his well-groomed hair and sighed. Well, do you think you could get in with your quirk? He inquired. He used caution when he said, it's not exactly conventional for a hero. He looked at his wife, unsure of how to phrase it. He didn't want his only child to be disheartened, but he also didn't want her to have unrealistic expectations. She gave him a quick look and gave him a nod of approval. After reviewing her application, Nanami nodded. She swallowed a dry lump in her throat and said, I know my quirk is weird, especially since it's nothing like either of yours, and it has a lot of setbacks, but. She closed her eyes and attempted to still her pounding heart. I've been practicing on how to use those setbacks to my advantage, she said. She peered through her bangs once more and said, I want to try at least. If I don't make it, I'll go to a normal school, so it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Her father, gazing at his daughter's sorrowful round eyes, muttered feebly, Sakura, she's doing the face. Sakura let out a deep sigh. Nanami shook her head sideways and said, You've always been a good kid. You don't ask for much, do you? Rolling up to Nanami, Sakura met her daughter's eyes. For a few seconds, the house was silent. Sakura grinned and lowered her head in surrender. She turned her chair to face her husband and said, Okay, then. If you think you can get into that high school, then I say go for it. Her husband merely shook his head when she asked, Hajime, any objections? She turned back to her daughter. The sight of tears in her child's eyes caused her eyes to widen. Well, there you have it. Oh sweetie, don't cry, it's okay. We said you can apply. After shaking her head, Nanami wiped her eyes. She squeezed out, It's not that, your wheel is on my foot. Oh shoot. I'm sorry. Her mother rolled backwards in abrupt fashion. With a feeble smile, Nanami put down her application to tend to her aching foot. After slowly floating down, the paper landed beneath the coffee table without causing any damage. It said that Yoshino Nanami is his name. Strangeness, bad luck. As she doodled in class, Nanami hummed contentedly. The school term was coming to an end, and she would soon be bidding Aldera Junior High farewell. She was trying to decide what she wanted her hero costume to look like while remaining as invisible as possible. Career papers were being distributed by her teacher, a woman who was running near the elderly side. Fortunately, she had to stand in the hall after catching the young blonde drawing instead of listening. Nanami sighed at her bad luck and shook her head. I don't know if that was my quirk, or if she's just perceptive, she told herself. She examined her doodling. So far, it was straightforward and featured a number of lucky charms. She scowled and started to consider how that might have been a mistake after all. Perhaps I should purchase bad luck charms if I'm to use my quirk to transfer my bad luck to my adversaries. However, I would be hampered if I experienced too much bad luck, wouldn't I? One could safely say that she was torn. She sighed, wishing once more that she possessed one of her parents' peculiarities. Mom's peculiarity is quite helpful. I can only imagine what I could do with the ability to make plants move and grow on command. I could also be a useful evacuation hero if I had Dad's super hearing. I suppose it's quite helpful that Mom uses her oddity in the garden instead. I believe I've witnessed her use her plants to create paint for art commissions. And who am I to complain when Dad enjoys his job as a police officer? She pondered. Her quirk was referred to by the doctor as a mutation, because it happened suddenly and had nothing to do with the family's known quirks. When she was in kindergarten, it had first appeared. Water fountains would suddenly go crazy and spray her in the face, or any school supplies she touched would magically stop working. Nanami and her family didn't realize this was a quirk situation for a long time. The last bell rang before she realized it. Nanami went to get her bag inside. When the teacher questioned Nanami about why she hadn't arrived when called, she replied, "A loud boy was making explosions in his hands when he walked by and I couldn't hear anything over his yelling." When it was too loud to hear her, the teacher would, of course, call her. With a sigh, Nanami apologized, made an unnecessary deep bow, and walked out into the packed hallways. Nanami moved stealthily through the throng of students heading to their lockers. She heard some students who appeared to be in the midst of a fight as she passed the closed door of a classroom. The shy blonde would normally creep past in silence, but she stopped when she heard a voice that sounded familiarly rude. Her eyes widened as she heard the sounds of explosions, and then she said, "Something wrong? You know, if you really want to be a hero, there may actually be a way. Pray that you'll be reborn with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the school." Trembling, Nanami bit her lip before turning to the door and violently swinging it open, unexpectedly confronting the bully. The four boys in the room were taken aback by this, as the boy with the same hair abruptly turned to face her with red eyes. She had to look up at him because her head hardly left his chest. With her hand behind her back to conceal her trembling, she glared at him while fortifying herself. Nothing came out of her mouth when she opened it to speak. The boy snorted. He mockingly asked, "You got something to say, Freckles?" Nanami stepped aside, her eyes dropping to the ground in embarrassment. The green-haired boy, who appeared to be about to cry, caught her eye. "No, nothing, I just came to speak with that boy over there," she said. "With Deku, huh?" the blonde boy said, glancing at her before he laughed. As he left, she murmured a soft, "Sure," and said, "Whatever, have fun." He stopped and glanced behind him. He and his friends kept leaving, saying, "I meant what I said, Deku. Don't even think about applying to UA or else." Something in Nanami was triggered by that. She scowled, turned, and hurried after him while Deku called out to her. She then returned her hand. What a jerk. Who does he think he is to speak to that boy in such a manner and advise him to commit suicide over such a thing? Angrily, she thought. Nanami slammed her hand as hard as she could onto his back, giving him a loud smack. With a noticeable crackling sound coming from his palm, the boy staggered forward a little before straightening out and glaring at her. Seeing his anger building, his friends scowled and backed off a little. He growled, "Did you just fucking hit me?" When Nanami realized what she had done, she glanced at her hand. Mentally cursing herself, she searched wildly for an explanation. "A bug," the boy scowled at her, flashing mini explosions from his crackling hand. He didn't appear to believe her as he approached her. There was a bug on your back, so I got it before it could bite you because I thought you were cute." She blurted out quickly, covering her mouth as her eyes widened and her face flushed bright red. The boy halted and lowered his hand, frowning in what seemed to be bewilderment. What? His pals started making fun of him, and he barked at them, his cheeks turning pink. Nanami recoiled in response. "Shut the fuck up, you losers. I swear I'll kill you," she said. Her brown eyes ducked out of his line of sight as he glanced at her once more. He averted his gaze and spun around. Taking one last look, he stormed off, yelling at his friends, "Whatever, this isn't worth my time, let's go." As Nanami watched him leave, her legs began to weaken. She turned to see the green-haired boy had vanished, and she sighed softly as the most terrifying part of the experience was over. She hurried to find him, recalling the insults that had been directed at him. Nanami went to the roof first out of paranoia. It was deserted. She approached the edge cautiously, looking around for a body that might have fallen. When she saw Deku wandering around looking for something, she let out a sigh of relief. With a small smile, she hurried down in the hopes of catching up to him. She hurried out to join him, putting on her outdoor shoes quickly. She discovered him glaring at what appeared to be a notebook in front of the koi pond, and a scorched one. She tapped on his shoulder hesitantly, careful not to accidentally activate her quirk. It looked like this boy was already unlucky. Excuse me, Deku-kun? Did that boy do that?" Angrily, Deku whipped back. With a startled squeak, Nanami backed away, saying, "That's not my name." His eyes grew wide with recognition, and he extended a hand, seemingly to allay her fear. "I'm sorry, my name isn't Deku, it's what Kachan calls me to make fun of me. My name is Midoriya Izuku," he made the correction quietly. She nodded once, assuming Kachan was his bully's nickname. With a worried tilt of her head, she said, "Am I Midoriya-kun? Are you okay? That boy said some mean things to you." As she spoke to him, her head was cocked downward. The action reminded Midoriya of a baby deer, and he tilted his head in confusion. His shoulders slumped as he gazed at his sopping wet notebook. He looked at Nanami, nodded, and let out a long sigh. "I'm alright, I guess. He's such a jerk. Just because I'm quirkless he thinks he can treat me like garbage." He started to leave. Then again, me being so spineless doesn't help. Nanami scowled and thought about going with the boy. With caution, she inquired, "Are you still going to apply to UA?" After pausing and hesitating, Midoriya nodded. "Well, I think I understand how you feel, just a little." Midoriya glanced back at her, perplexed. "You're quirkless too?" Nanami stiffened, then shook her head. When she saw how disappointed he was, she immediately turned around. My quirk is called misfortune. I bring bad luck wherever I go. Sometimes I can pass it on to others. I want to be a hero and go to UA too, and my parents said I can, but sometimes I worry that my quirk isn't suited for a hero. Like, what if I was saving someone and all of a sudden the floor collapses, or something? That's happened to me before when my family went to an old inn. She began to walk away. Desperate to jot down such fascinating information, Midoriya's hand ached as he turned to his notebook. Nanami vaguely heard him murmuring, I didn't know a quirk like that existed. He appeared to be considering what he had been told. I think it could be useful. If you passed bad luck onto a villain, it would be good luck for your allies. Though I guess it could still be difficult since you'd still be affected. Nanami couldn't help but smile at the boy's thoughtfulness. She hesitated, realizing that she was butting into his business and that he might not want her sympathy. That's a nice thought, but anyway, I don't think you should give up on going to UA. I heard they got rid of the rule saying you need a quirk to get in, so I'm sure there's still hope. I'm sorry, I should probably mind my own business. Besides, I don't want to pass any bad luck to you, so I'll see you later, she replied gently. Midoriya grinned a little, feeling a little happier. Sure, but, your name. Nanami winced with insight. She was butting into his affairs without even introducing herself. She bowed courteously. After some hesitation, she took out her phone and said, My name is Yoshino Nanami. It's nice to meet you. Because all of her smartphones kept breaking and she needed something more durable, it was a flip phone. She said, Do you want to exchange numbers? Astonished, Midoriya gazed at her. Her question had caused both teenagers to flush. Holding the phone in front of her face as though it could conceal her embarrassment, Nanami closed her eyes. Nanami was forcing herself to stop talking, telling herself, in case you feel like talking, or you're having a bad day. And not that I think you always get into bad situations or something. Midoriya's eyes shifted to her phone. What a sweetheart. Does this mean I can now call her a friend? He pulled out his phone and gave a small nod. Why yes, I'd like to exchange numbers, please. Nanami gave the frazzled boy a bright smile of relief and they exchanged numbers. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Nanami felt lighter. In fact, she was able to assist someone. Indeed, it was a positive step. Bakugo stepped in a puddle and grunted. Gross. He raked his hand through his spiky hair and growled. He thought of the girl with the doe eyes and freckles. His cheeks began to flush. Does she find me cute? That's what kind of bullshit. So foolish. As he drained his soda can, he pondered. His naive friend mockingly said, Hey Katsuki, you still thinking about that girl from earlier? Bakugo gave him a glare in return. Don't go talking bullshit, of course not. His other friend laughed. Whatever, anyway, aren't you and Midoriya childhood friends? Don't you think you went a little overboard today? Katsuki frowned and stopped. It's his fault for getting in my way. He suddenly remembered what the boy had said earlier. I may not have a quirk, but I can still try my best, can't I? He gave a frustrated growl. He crushed and exploded the can in his hand before tossing it aside, saying, Someone needs to teach that nerd how the world works. Lowly, he complained, I hate when he talks about heroes. As they pointed behind him, his friend's horrified eyes widened to the side. When Bakugo turned around, he saw a figure entirely composed of what appeared to be sewage water. A skinsuit with a powerful quirk. Am I lucky or what? As she made her way home, Nanami hummed. Since school ended, she hadn't experienced many misfortunes. Nothing happened. No dogs tried to chase her, no puddles were stepped in. It has been a fairly good day so far. She muttering to herself with delight, perhaps I'll purchase a snack while I'm here. She heard a commotion as she was moving through the mall. As she glanced around, she soon noticed a sizable group of people gathering in an alleyway. She frowned and made the decision to head home quickly. If it was a villain attack, she didn't want to risk it. Nanami entered her home while sipping matcha-flavored taiyaki, happy that she hadn't dropped the dessert as she usually does. When she entered, her father rushed to her and gave her a hug. Oh, her taiyaki was gone. With a disappointed sigh, she said, Dad. Hajime looked at his daughter after glancing down at the fallen treat. Sorry Nanami, I'll get you a new one. Your mother and I are just so relieved you're okay. Nanami scowled in perplexity. She questioned, what do you mean, why wouldn't I be? In her wheelchair, her mother rolled over to them. There's currently a villain attack in the Tatooine shopping district. A student from your school is being held hostage. You came home later than normal, and with your bad luck, we were scared it was you. Why didn't you answer your phone? she clarified and demanded answers. Nanami grimaced as she noticed that the battery had died on her phone. She paused and tensed up abruptly. Sorry, it died. I was having such good luck today too, she said. She said, wait, from my school? Sakura scowled and turned back to face the living room. With a sigh, she rolled back into the living room. Yes, the news is covering it right now. The heroes aren't having much success though. She cried out, hey, there's the student. Oh my, it's a young boy. Hajime hurried to observe. Nanami started to shudder. A boy she went to school with. She couldn't have interacted with one of the boys earlier, could she? It can't be, can it? She's pretty sure she didn't use her quirk on either of them. She approached the couch with trepidation and took a seat beside her father. The boy's face came into focus once more. Her blood froze. He was the one. The earlier bully. He was nearly completely absorbed in the body of a sludge monster. His mouth and nose were covered, and it appeared that he was unable to breathe. Then she whispered, Kei-ka-chan. She suddenly recalled all of her recent good fortune and the moment she slapped him on the back. Oh no. Abruptly, a well-known head with curly green hair emerged from the screen into the conflict. When she saw Midoriya dash in to save his friend, she almost had a heart attack. As she remembered the time she tapped him on the shoulder and talked to him for a long time, her eyes widened in horror and her hands flew to her mouth. Oh my god, I am solely to blame for this. Leaning forward, she closed her eyes tightly and clasped her hands together. Please, please, save them. Someone, please, she said a mental prayer. Detruit. SMAASSH. When she saw All Might, the top hero, she let go of the breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Closing her eyes and letting her head hang on the back of the couch, she fought back tears. Her parents gave her worried looks, but she chose to ignore them while she thought. I need to apologize the next time I see them because I thought I had better control over my eccentricity around other people. That night, Nanami went to bed early. As he carried a tray of pancakes and fresh fruit to his daughter's room, Hajime hummed. Since the incident involving her two classmates, Nanami had withdrawn herself for the entire weekend. He tried his hardest to persuade his beloved daughter that she wasn't at fault for the incident, but it didn't work. So his last resort seemed to be to eat breakfast in bed. He gently called for his daughter and knocked on the door. Nanami? I've brought you breakfast, can I come in? Nanami was shuffling in bed, and he could hear her say quietly, I'm not hungry, Dad, soon after. He smiled slightly and retorted, it's chocolate chip pancakes with fresh berries and whipped cream. After a brief period of silence, footsteps could be heard. With suspicion, Nanami peered out the door after opening it. Her father walked in with the tray balanced on his arm, patted her head, and laughed. He surveyed his daughter's room, getting acquainted with any new charms she had acquired for good fortune. It was neat, at least. Are you still upset by what happened with those boys? In the end they were all right. It's really okay. Besides, there's no proof that this happened because of your quirk. He replied gently. As Nanami continued to eat her pancakes, he observed her lack of response. After taking a few bites, she put down her fork and turned to face her father in dismay. Nanami sighed and set her tray next to her, saying, just like there's no proof that this didn't happen because of my quirk. Leaning back, she gazed at the ceiling while resting her hands behind her. Can I really be a hero, Dad? I mean, let's say it wasn't my fault. I walked past the scene. I keep thinking over and over, if I had stayed, what could I have done to help? It's haunting me. Because every time I imagine myself going against that sludge monster thing, I can't see how I'd be any help at all, just how my bad luck could make it worse. Hajime pursed his lips in contemplation. When he closed his eyes, he couldn't help but think about how his daughter might have helped. He furrowed his brows, finding it difficult to see how her misfortune could be beneficial. He saw her dash forward like the boy with the green hair, only to stumble over something and fall into the villain's grasp. As he pictured Nanami hurling something at the villain, only for it to bounce back at her and land her in the villain's grasp once more, beads of sweat formed on his head. Observing her father's facial expressions shift multiple times, Nanami scowled. He noticed her standing up and shaking her head. She inhaled deeply before slapping her hands to her cheeks. Right, she said, balling her fists and turning to face her dad. She exclaimed, Dad, I've decided how I'll apologize to those boys. Her father started to say something, but she interrupted him. She clenched her fist and gazed at it, saying, no matter how you spin it, those boys were unlucky. So I'm going to apologize by being a better hero. I'll meet Midoriya-kun at UA, and I'm sure the Kachan guy will be there too. He's quirkless and persistent. She looked up and turned to her father. I'll meet them at UA, and I'll get on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness after I hone my quirk so this never happens again. Hajime smiled proudly at his daughter's enthusiasm, but he blinked at the abrupt change in mood. He got to his feet and placed his hands on Nanami's shoulders. With excitement, he said, "Right, I'll help you in any way I can, Nanami. Now what's the first step?" Pulling out her phone, Nanami chose Midoriya's number. "First I'm going to text Midoriya-kun some words of encouragement," she said. Her dad gave her a nod of approval. She raised her thumbs and gave her phone a determined glare. Very quietly, Hajime said, Nanami. Sweetie, why are you shaking so much?" Not having typed a single character, Nanami was practically vibrating as she turned to face her father with rather comical tears. "Dad, I've never texted a boy before, what do I say?" Pulling an old tire across the sand, Midoriya grunted. He had been selected as All Might's successor, and as part of his training, he was required to perform some intense community service. Since half of the trash on the beach weighed as much as he did, if not more, it was quite exhausting. He paused briefly to check his phone after his back pocket began to ping. His gaze expanded. He opened the message and looked around to see if his mentor was looking. "A text from Yoshino-san," he said. "How are you doing, Midoriya-kun? I saw what happened on the news a few days ago, and you were awesome when you tried to save that boy. I know you'll be a great hero, which is why I'm not giving up either. I'll see you at UA, I swear. Nanami Yoshino." Finished with a large smiley emoji. In gratitude, Midoriya's cheeks began to burn a little. "A promise," he said, glancing at the tire and the dirt that covered the beach. He hurriedly replied, "I'll see you there," while glancing at his phone and pressing the send button. With a renewed sense of resolve, Midoriya snatched up the tire and tugged hard. With an inquisitive grin on his face, Toshinori observed from a distance. His perspiration stopped when he saw the young boy topple over from tugging. "Well, he seems more motivated all of a sudden." Small Might hurried over to the boy to make sure he was unharmed. "I wonder if he realizes he'd have an easier time if he just rolled it." Sitting on her bed, Nanami gazed at the text message she had sent to Midoriya. The message's sheer insolence made her start to perspire. After 23 minutes of worrying, she wrote it out, and she only sent it after receiving both parents' approval. Her father had insisted on adding more energy because her initial draft had only stated, "Let's do our best to get into UA Midoriya-kun." Her father insisted that adding more would make her feelings more apparent, but her mother didn't see anything wrong with it. She was concerned that she had said something inappropriate, though, after reviewing the message log. "I'll definitely see you at UA. Why did I say that? With my luck I might not get in because I said that. Then he'll think I'm a liar." She moaned loudly. She pouted as she glanced at her phone once more. "Maybe I could erase it before he sees. Yeah, I'll do that." She went to the options button and was about to select the option to remove the message when she suddenly realized it had already been read. Nanami held her head in her hands and moaned once more. Her cat, who had been lounging on the corner of her bed, was startled when she squealed and threw her phone at the edge of her bed when it pinged. "Oh gosh, I'm sorry Mio," she said as she scurried to the edge of her bed and apologetic petted her cat. She put the fluffy creature down and then sat down again. She looked at her phone, carefully picked it up, and picked up the message. "I'll see you there." Nanami's lips were pressed together in struggle. She let out a sigh, shook her head, and lay down. She moaned once more, "Well, now there's no turning back." Nanami had started preparing for the entrance exam a few months prior, and it had been weeks since then. At 5 in the morning, she jogged in the park with her curly hair held up in 2 wild pigtails. The entrance exam was physically taxing, if she was to believe what she had heard. "My peculiarity might not be sufficient to gain entry. I also need to train my body," she pondered wearily. As she jogged in the cold early morning, she could see her breath. In an attempt to boost her adrenaline and cold tolerance, she put on the lightest jacket she owned. Running against the urge to sneeze, she rubbed her nose, then huffed and started punching the air. She had little upper body strength, so her punches didn't seem to have much force behind them, but she intended to build that up. She didn't anticipate turning the corner, though, and her small fists struck something solid. She shook her hand painfully and staggered back a little. In an attempt to properly apologize to her victim, she looked up and said, "Ow, I'm sorry, are you all right?" When her brown eyes met irate red eyes, her face turned blue. "Eek." She retreated a few paces. "Kei-Kachan," she shouted out. Bakugo narrowed his eyes and dusted his sleeve while he gazed at her. Nanami was envious of his comfortable-looking jacket. Compared to her thin sweater, it appeared to be very warm. At last, he said. He growled angrily, "Who the hell are you calling Kachan?" And what's the big idea hitting me like that? He walked a few paces in her direction. Nanami retreated defensively, holding her arms straight. She attempted an explanation, saying, I'm sorry, that's the only name I know you by. And I didn't see you there. I would never just hit someone I don't know. Bakugo acknowledged with a raised eyebrow. When she finished speaking, he smirked. He scoffed, half amused, half annoyed. Well, if that ain't the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. If I recall, you hit me the first day you met me, he said. Recalling the incident where she slapped his back in her pitiful lie that day, Nanami's eyes brightened. She stumbled under the taller boy's noncommittal gaze. She squeaked out, what are you doing out so early? It was a foolish question. With a full bag raised for emphasis, he shot back sarcastically, convenience store run. What are you doing out so early, Freckles? Nanami wasn't anticipating a direct response. The cold had dried her lip, and she found herself wincing as she bit it in thought. I'm tea training. I want tea to be fit for the entrance exam for UA, since I don't have a power that would make things easy, so I started jogging before school, she replied after licking her lip once. She was shivering, by the way. She was afraid that the arrogant blonde in front of her would misinterpret her behavior. Look the bully in the eye, Nanami, and never show him that you're scared. Stop shaking, stop, she mentally reprimanded herself. Bakugo gave the little girl a once-over. He lost his smirk and became annoyed at her sorry state. He seemed more irate than worried as he demanded, what the hell are you wearing out in this weather? And why the hell is your hair up in those stupid pigtails, aren't you freezing? As if to emphasize his rage, his hand exploded with the familiar sound of tiny explosions. The reprimand that Nanami received caused her tense shoulders to slump in shock. She gave a slight shrug as she glanced at her flimsy jacket. I read somewhere that training in the sea cold H helps with burning calories and building muscle. She was sniffling and sneezing. Thinking back on it, I guess that's a dumb idea. Bakugo gave an eye roll. He mockingly said, no shit, it's a dumb idea. What, did you get that idea out of a magazine? The two blondes were silent for a moment. That's exactly what happened, it seems. Bakugo's tiny explosions burst once more. Are you an idiot? Holy shit, and you're trying to be a hero, he was furious. Nanami looked down, shrinking into her sweater. The woman muttered to herself, I could ask you the same thing. Fortunately, Bakugo did not appear to hear her. She sighed, obviously disheartened by her lack of common sense. I know it was stupid, all right? Now excuse me, I need to go home and warm up, I guess, she said. Bakugo observed the girl with freckles making her way to the park's exit. Her trembling grew worse, and his eyes narrowed. With a growl and a hand raking through his hair, he approached Nanami and seized her shoulder, causing her to jerk back. Bakugo tugged on Nanami, causing her to yell in surprise. She pushed his hand off her shoulder and spun around. She yelled, Don't touch me. Bakugo looked at his hand and then back at her, raising an eyebrow. She took a noticeable step back as he extended his hand once more and said, so you can yell. What a surprise. He noticed that she was tucked in and that her head was cocked downward. What the hell is your problem now? He exclaimed. To be honest, he was no longer able to determine whether she was freezing or afraid. He stepped forward with a slight smirk and said, Look, I ain't a pervert or anything. Half-heartedly, he mocked, even if I was, it doesn't matter because you think I'm cute. As Nanami recalled the embarrassing incident, her cheeks began to flush. She drew her hair out of her pigtails and sighed. She sneezed, if you touch me you'll get her. She felt terrible about wearing this flimsy sweater. It's really cold, she said. On the back of his head, Bakugo noticed an irk mark. He removed his jacket and threw it at her, watching with satisfaction as it landed on her head. You're seriously pissing me off, you can't even talk, he said. What kind of hero are you? Get out of here before I kill you. The intense body heat that was trapped in the large jacket caused Nanami to relax. She took it from her head. As she wrapped herself in the jacket, she felt her trembling less and asked softly, won't you get cold? He sneered, as if insulted by the foolishness of her inquiry. Shut up, I'm going straight home. Unlike you, I'm not dumb enough to spend a long time in the cold. You jerk, stop calling me stupid. Nanami thought angrily. She wouldn't tell him what she thought, of course. She bowed respectfully to him while closing her eyes. She looked up at him, her nose red from the cold and her cheeks freckled. Thank you, she said. Bakugo turned his head away. I'll bring this back. Bakugo pivoted. He heated his hands with his quirk and started to leave, saying, whatever, you do that, I don't really care. The freckled girl was still standing there when he turned to look behind him. He lit up his hand and his eye twitched. Hey, Freckles. Don't apply to UA, a quirkless loser like you is gonna get killed at the entrance exam, just like Deku. He yelled. He saw the look of bewilderment shift across her face. He gave a single nod, mainly to himself, and turned to go to his apartment. Nanami's head cocked. She zipped his jacket around her and started to walk home, asking, quirkless. She glanced up at the sky before blinking as a strong odor caught her attention. I didn't say I was quirkless, did I? She asked. After surveying the area, she glanced down at Kachan's jacket. Smelling the sleeve, she raised her arm. It smells like a fireplace, she said with a small smile before continuing to walk cautiously around any sidewalk cracks. As Nanami gazed at the enormous coffee stain on the jacket Bakugo had lent her, she became alarmed. It was deeply sunk in, just over the chest, and seemed beyond saving. In desperation, she thought, I'm going to get exploded. Bakugo had to be as big as her father, of course. She put it in the living room, and her father, of course, had to try it on. Because of how young and hip he looked, he had to wear it with a cup of coffee for a photo. Hajime knelt down in front of his daughter and bowed repeatedly. He apologized repeatedly, but it didn't seem to improve the situation. I'm sorry, Nanami, I really am. Forgive this foolish man. I didn't realize it was your friends, I just thought your mother got me a present, he said. Shaking her head, Sakura took the jacket and examined it before rolling over to her husband and daughter. She sighed and said, maybe you should have asked, dearest. She tilted her head and rubbed her thumb over the cloth. She wheeled off to do some laundry after saying, well, good news. The stain is fresh, so it shouldn't be difficult to get out. Bad news. You won't be able to give it to your friend today. I'm sure he'll understand. Nanami buried her face in her hands and let out a loud groan. She simply ignored her father's repeated apologies and left the house to go to school. She walked with her eyes fixed forward. It's okay, it's okay. I'll just say I'm washing it out of courtesy and I'll give it to him tomorrow, she said to herself. Yeah. I'll say, Kachan, since you were so kind to me, I'm washing your jacket and will return it tomorrow. That sounds good. She was shouting to herself. Satisfied with her solution, she clenched her fists in determination. She walked on and then stopped. She let out an audible, wait, that attracted the attention of a bystander. She blushed and lowered her head in the hopes of vanishing. He doesn't like being called Kachan, does he? I don't even know his real name, though. How come I didn't ask him? POV shift. Midoriya. Laughing face, Midoriya felt almost asleep as she made her way to school. With a mighty yawn, he trudged on, thinking, All Might's training regimen is exhausting, and then there's that chance that I'm not even compatible. When he saw Nanami, his gaze strayed upward and brightened. He sped up to a jog and was soon standing beside her. Hi, Yoshino-san. She exclaimed, Duh, I'm just washing it, I swear. She flinched violently, and he watched in bewilderment. She turned slowly toward him and instantly relaxed when she saw her fellow freckled person. She greeted him by nodding her head. Midoriya gave a small smile. He thought, laughing, geez, I thought I was shy. With a faint smile, he said, are you okay? His smile faded when she didn't respond right away. Wash what? Did something happen? Nanami's lips were pursed. The sight was concerning. She pulled her long hair a little and twirled it around her index finger. At last she said something. As she flexed her hands in a manner reminiscent of Bakugo's small explosions, she said, Kachan gave me his jacket earlier this morning, just to borrow because it was cold and I was jogging in a thin jacket. I think he may have been keeping himself warm with his quirk, but... Midoriya's gaze expanded. The urge to write down this information made his fingers twitch. Did Kachan do something similar? Hold on, he can stay warm? In contemplation, he placed his hand to his chin. If he can keep himself warm in winter, he'll sweat more, so even though he'll be a slow start, he'll still be able to produce more explosions. I wonder if he'd still be able to create big explosions against villains. Maybe if he concentrated explosions on being hotter, would he sweat more? Can he control the temperature of his explosions, or do they remain the same temp? He disappeared when he saw Nanami's worried gaze. Sorry, I have a habit of muttering. Nanami gave a cautious nod. I kind of thought you were possessed for a moment, she said hesitantly. Midoriya chuckled uneasily. He paused and slammed his fist into his palm. I'd be lying if I said you were the first to say that. So Kachan gave you his jacket. That's surprisingly nice of him. Why would that? He said. Oh, I get it. Your quirk must have caused something to happen to it, he shouted. As Nanami hid in her school jacket, he perspired. She turned back to face him and said, right on the money. I don't want him thinking I'm trying to stall, but my mom is cleaning it up so. Midoriya gave a nod. You said you can pass your misfortune on to others and items, right? He inquired. Nanami gave a nod. Maybe you should hold off on giving him the jacket. You wore it so if something happened to it, it must have absorbed your misfortune. How long does it stay like that? Nanami thought about the jacket for a moment. She blushed as she said, I wore it for a couple of hours, but she knew that was probably superfluous. She winced at her own words, as if she were concerned about something Midoriya wouldn't comprehend. I was cold so, I fell asleep in it. Anyway, it's a big jacket on me. The time varies, but if I did pass my misfortune onto it could vary between 1 week and 1 month. A whole month, huh? Why don't you just tell him? Kachan may be mean, violent, short-tempered, and an overall jerk of a person, but if you tell him you'll most likely be left off the hook. Tell him about your quirk and I'm sure he might understand and will be less likely to explode you, he suggested. He thought about whether he could have phrased that plan more effectively as he saw Nanami shudder. Nanami looked at her shoes. Ichi thinks I'm quirkless for some reason. I think when I said, I don't have a power that would make things easy, he misunderstood. Do you think he'd get mad? She inquired. As soon as the school was in sight, Midoriya noticed her pulling at her hair once more. It was a habit of nervousness. Midoriya gave a feeble smile. Given his knowledge of Kachan, he might become enraged. He always makes assumptions, so he might believe she was lying to him. He pondered. He felt sorry for the girl, who was often the object of Bakugo's anger. Perhaps it's time to switch the subject for a bit, he pondered. Yoshino-san. She muttered, you can just call me Nanami. She had a shaky smile on her face when he looked at her. She paused and examined her shoes before responding. We're friends, right? So Nanami is fine. Or do you prefer Yoshino? I never really had friends so Midoriya averted his eyes as his face flushed red. He covered his face in shame and said, Nanami-san is fine. Then you can call me Izuku, being addressed by my first name by a girl. I never imagined that day would arrive. I'm not sure if I'm prepared for it. Reluctantly, Nanami said, Izuku. She paused and waved her hands nervously before saying, like Izuku, but with kun at the end. Oh, or is that too informal? I'm sorry, am I being weird? The two freckled teenagers remained silent and covered their red faces in different embarrassing ways. The two embarrassed students were passed by a large crowd. Despite their strange appearance, they continued to walk while muttering about their peculiar actions. His throat was cleared by Izuku. I wanted to ask. Yoshino, I mean Nanami-san. Who's your favorite hero? He inquired. As they walked into the school, Nanami considered the idea. I'd have to say, Eraserhead? He's an underground hero, I doubt you know him. Izuku jumped enthusiastically into the subject. Eraserhead is the hero that erases quirks just by looking. He doesn't like being in the spotlight, so not many people know him. It's said he's trained in hand-to-hand combat, but there's not much video on him, but he's capable, they say. I heard he graduated from UAN. As she removed her shoes and put them in her locker, she observed, Izuku, you're very enthusiastic about heroes. He put on his school slippers and grinned slightly. Oh yeah, I guess I am. I've always enjoyed analyzing them, he said. He looked at his hand and balled it into a fist, saying, All Might is my all-time favorite. He saves everyone with a smile. I want to be just like him. I'll be even closer to that objective once he gives me his quirk. Nanami nodded and grinned slightly. That's a great goal. Even without a quirk, I'm sure you'll be an amazing hero. I'll be your first fan too. Izuku repositioned his shoe, blushing. He smiled and gave her the thumbs up, saying, Yeah, the same goes for you. I'll be your fan when you're a hero. As they left for their individual classes, they waved to one another. Change the point of view. You'll be less likely to be exploded if you just talk to him. Izuku assured me that everything would be fine. Stop acting like such a coward. Nanami pondered. She stopped when she became aware of something. Izuku moaned aloud. I didn't ask him what Kachan's name is. If I keep calling him by this pet name, he'll think I like him at this rate. What an idiot. Her teacher, who was standing directly next to her desk, hissed, Oh, an idiot you say? Well, if you think so lowly of my class you can stand in the hall, Yoshino-san. With a sigh, Nanami went out into the hallway. Geez, she said as she peered out the window before her class. She looked at her hands and shook her head. According to Izuku, my bad luck must have been absorbed by Kachan's jacket because I haven't experienced much misfortune since this morning, except for the time my foot got stuck in a bucket. Nanami knelt down and used her fingers to draw on the ground. With a sigh, She chose to appreciate the quiet for once. As she observed different students moving across the hall, she noticed that some of them had peculiar appearances. She pondered how many, if any, she would encounter on the entrance exam. It must be beneficial to be well informed like that, so perhaps I should examine things like Izukun. She puckered her lips and sighed as she glanced up at the ceiling. She whispered, I wonder if I should train at a dojo, or maybe. She tried to picture Izuku fighting like he was now, but she was unable to do so. I wonder if Izukun has any fighting skills, she said. She laughed. She thought, he's so nice, I can't imagine him punching anyone. Frustrated, she shook her head. She wrapped a long strand of her hair around her finger and pulled, saying, I've got to learn somehow. The entrance exam is about showcasing your talents and quirks or something. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. Think, come on, how can I use my quirk to my advantage, she said. Pulling it out in silence, she glanced through the corridors, back and forth. Her mother had texted her. Okay, so honey, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I got the coffee stain out. The bad news, I just want you to know this was unintentional but. Nanami almost screamed as she scrolled down. The jacket that Kachan had given her had a pale beige fluff on the hood and was originally a pale mustard yellow. The jacket was a strange pinkish-orange color, and the fluff was pink now. Somehow a red shirt was left in the washing machine, even though I could have sworn it was empty, and it turned orange and pink. I'm sorry, but even I can't save this. After school goes see how much it costs and we will replace it. Nanami collapsed onto her butt. She whimpered, yeah, it definitely absorbed my quirk. Nanami sprinted over to Izuku's class as soon as the bell rang. She discovered that it was a little simpler to stay out of the crowd. She jumped out of the crowd of students as soon as she saw the door to his class. She yelled, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? As she opened the door and saw the one person she had been dreading seeing all day. Kachan along with his companions. Her gaze expanded. The sight of him caused her to tremble instantly. He was teased by his long-fingered companion. Hey, Katsuki, it's your girlfriend. Nanami's eyes grew wide with recognition. The name Katsuki is his. Katsuki turned to glare at him as his eye twitched. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye and said, shut up you clown, she's not my girlfriend, he said sternly. What do you want? Come to return what you borrowed. He is aware. When Nanami started crying, her shaking reached a breaking point. I will be blown up. Katsuki winced. What the hell are you crying for? His other companion laughed and said, I dunno, probably because your face is scarier than it is cute. On the back of his head, there was an irk mark. He gave him a scowl. He turned back to Nanami, winced, and clicked his tongue. I swear I'll kill you, he said. He extended his hand. Hey. She noticed Izuku staring worriedly from the side. Izukun, she exclaimed. She sprinted past Katsuki and held onto Izuku's jacket, burying her face in his shoulder and giving him a little shake. Her voice was a shrieking, squeaky mess when she opened her mouth to speak. In an attempt to understand her rambling, Izuku put his hands on her shoulders, leaned down, and tilted his ear towards her despite blushing from the close contact. She looked in his direction. Izuku's face flushed red, and he quickly raised his head. He spoke a little too loudly. I can't understand you, Nanami-san. Nanami raised her head and whispered in his ear while sniffling. POV shift. Bakugo. Bakugo observed with irritation as Freckles held on to the nerd. Shouldn't he have been the one she found attractive? When Deku got very close to her and practically hugged her, he frowned. Nanami leaned up as he was ready to go, and Deku's face was unusually close. It looked like they were getting ready to kiss to the untrained eye. Bakugo then let out a sigh he was unaware he was holding as Deku retreated. What is he doing, in his opinion? Did he refer to her as Nanami? Does she go by that first name? On a first-name basis, how are they? He stopped thinking about it. Hold on, why am I concerned? I don't. Then she said something in a whisper. Deku jumped, glanced in his direction, and then turned back to Nanami. She showed her his phone and nodded. Deku took her phone and stared at it, his eyes widening. Glancing at the jacket, he gestured to Bakugo, who gave him a scowl. He turned to face Nanami again. She nodded while burying her face in her hands. Bakugo's eye twitched. Then he strode over to them and snatched Nanami's phone from Deku's grasp, saying, What the hell are you gossiping about? Deku attempted to reclaim it by reaching over. Kachan, wait before you look at that. Bakugo instantly backed up as his hand popped in annoyance. His eyes widened at the sight of his jacket as he scoffed and turned to face the phone. Looking at Nanami, he exclaimed, What the hell, Is this my jacket? As more powerful explosions erupted from his palm. What the hell did you do to it? That thing costs 20,000 yen? Nanami became smaller. She looked down and tried not to cry. I'm sorry. We tried to clean it but it got mixed with a red shirt and it bled and I'll pay it back, I promise. I'll get you a new one, she said. She mumbled, I'm sorry, I really am, it wasn't intentional, as she slowly followed Deku. Bakugo gave a tongue click. He fought the urge to destroy her phone. He pushed her phone back into her hands and said, fine. But it better be the same one. I won't accept a knockoff. Nanami nodded, her eyes brightening. She wiped her eyes and nodded, why yes of course. She saw his eye twitch and nearly jumped 3 feet back, saying, it'll take a while to raise some money since I'm not allowed to have a part-time job. I will get it though, I promise. With a sardonic grin on his face, his long-fingered companion turned to face him. He pushed him out of the class and went behind him, saying, Katsuki, you're scaring the girl half to death. That is not how you pick up chicks. He'll wait, but you're probably going to have to kiss him to make him forgive ya. Bakugo let out a series of medium-sized explosions as his eyes grew wide. He was pushed out of the room without seeing Nanami's face. What the hell are you saying? Don't lump me in with you perverts, he exclaimed. The other companion gave a headshake. Dude, you're asking for Katsuki to explode you. POV shift. Let's go back to Nanami. Nanami could hear his shouts coming from farther away as they walked away. She looked at Izuku, and her cheeks turned red. You don't think he'll make me kiss him, do you? Izuku waved his hand to dismiss her concerns as he laughed uneasily. He glanced at the picture on her phone and said, don't worry, Kachan isn't interested in things like romance. I guess it did absorb your misfortune. Have you been any luckier today? In contemplation, Nanami pulled at her hair. Maybe a little. I didn't fall down any stairs or get splashed by cars. But I stepped in a bucket, so I guess I'm not completely lucky. That could mean that the bad luck on it has already started returning to me. She paused. She inquired, his name is Katsuki? Izuku questioned bewilderedly. Oh? Yeah, Bakugo Katsuki. You didn't know? I thought you liked him? As her eyes grew wide, Nanami shook her head and frantically tangled her already unkempt hair. She timidly pressed her fingers together and said, no, Izukun, no, I said he was cute because, he is, physically, but I only said that because I was scared of getting exploded when I hit him. She whimpered, he's so scary, how do you deal with him? Izuku grinned slightly and blinked. I just try to stay out of his way. Nanami merely gave a nod. That sounded like a difficult accomplishment somehow. Nanami kicked a can as she made her way through the shopping area. She was having a difficult morning so far. In frustration with herself, she pulled at her hair. She glanced at her hand. Here, I want to be a hero, but I can't even talk to Bakugo-kun without freaking out. He has such a powerful quirk. Not only that, he looks like he's physically strong. How am I supposed to be able to compete with that? She tightened her grip. With a furious shake of her head, Nanami asked, will they even notice someone like me? No, Nanami, think positively. Try using your gymnastics experience, Mom said. That can be useful to you in some way. She made an effort to motivate herself. She lost her balance and tipped forward after abruptly missing the can. She started waving her hands wildly, trying to catch herself. Unfortunately, it was in vain because she struck the ground with a loud splat, face first. She was about to stand up when she heard someone stepping on her head and instantly pulled their foot away. She sensed that people were staring at her, and there was a long silence. She moaned, OWW, my apologies, are you all right? The voice said, his tone worried but icy. Without raising her head, Nanami raised one arm. No, I'm fine. Just let me die in my shame a little longer, she said in a dejected and monotonous voice while dismissively waving her hand. She closed her eyes tightly as she felt someone grab her hand. Put it in a box. This kind person doesn't deserve it. Don't give away your peculiarity. As though the person hadn't anticipated her being so light, she was lifted effortlessly and briefly felt her feet lift off the ground. I didn't mean to step on you. I didn't see you. After cleaning herself up, Nanami turned to face him. Her cheeks became as red as half of his hair. Her gaze strayed to the white portion. She was fascinated. She had never seen a prettier boy than him. Furthermore, he was holding her hand. She yelled and withdrew her hand. She started to retreat. I'm sorry, I apologize. I was in your way, she said. Why, you shouldn't touch me if you don't want anything bad to happen to you. When a hand settled on the boy's shoulder, his eyes darkened and he cocked his head in bewilderment. Are you threatening my son? when Nanami looked up and saw the flame hero. Endeavor, her eyes widened. Since the hero was outside of his normal territory, her face contorted into one of bewilderment. She looked back at the boy, whose face appeared to twist into a greater rage as he pushed Endeavor's hand off his shoulder, and her face went pale. No sir. Not at all, I would never, I just. Leave her alone. It was an accident. Even if she was threatening me, I stepped on her. There's no reason for this mistreatment, the young man said. Endeavor laughed. Taking a look at Nanami, he said, You're too soft, Shoto. I came here because we have some business to attend to. You're in the way. She met the number 2 hero's gaze. Blue eyes narrowed at her, piercing. Nanami started to shake with a faint anger. I wonder why I am the target of so much hate. There was nothing wrong with me. Her eyes narrowed as she fought back tears. She twitched her fingers. She closed her eyes and started to visualize a black mist being drawn into a box. I want to give it to him. Bad luck. She took a trembling breath and bowed deeply, saying, Lock it up. Don't let it spread. She said, I apologize, and fled without turning around. Nanami's hand held a tiny stone. Her knuckles whitened as she clenched it tightly. She whispered to herself, Focus, focus, get it all out, don't leave even a drop left. She imagined the black haze leaving her body and settling into the stone. Eliminate all bad luck and focus on your training. She opened her palm as the rock cracked. She glanced about. I wonder if this helps, she said. After meeting that boy and Endeavor, I don't think my heart can handle more bad luck. Nanami noticed that the grass was damp from the previous rain as she touched it. She stepped back a couple of paces, took a breath, put the rock down, and ran. Bracing herself in case she fell, she ran through the grass. She lifted both arms and gulped. I can do it, she thought to herself. She leapt and rolled forward, landing on her hands. She forced herself back into the air and squeezed her eyes shut. She put her feet firmly on the floor and straightened her legs. She made a V with her arms raised in the air. Her heartbeat accelerated and her eyes grew wide. It had been 2 years since she had successfully executed a front flip. I did it, I didn't fall or anything. Excited, Nanami hurried back to retrieve the stone. She was so joyful that she nearly forgot what had transpired earlier. After examining the stone, she started to move in search of a burial spot. She hummed a light tune as she made the decision to bury it beneath an old cricket park bench, and if it has absorbed my quirk, I should make sure that no one will stumble upon it until it wears off. It looked like the most secure choice. As she started to dig into the soggy dirt, she muttered, Perhaps I should do this on the day of the exam. Nanami carefully dropped the stone into the hole once she was satisfied with its depth. She covered it appropriately, then got up and went to wash up. She swiftly cleaned herself of the mud after locating a public restroom. Nanami noticed that her hair looked a little wilder on the flip when she looked in the mirror. She quickly used the extra scrunchie she always carried on hand to tie it up in a messy, small ponytail. As she walked, Nanami hummed contentedly, concluding that it would be wise to use the recreation center located farther downtown. It was well known for promoting muscle growth and featured high beams and similar features. She started thinking about the attractive boy she had met before. Remembering his icy eyes, she scowled at the constricted sensation in her chest and thought, I wonder if he'll be going to UA. He must be talented if he's Endeavor's son. What's giving me such a negative vibe? Is Endeavor safe for that boy? She gave a firm shake of her head. He is, of course. Despite his fearsome nature, Endeavor is a hero. That boy is safe, of course. She pulled at the long part of her hair that she had left untied. Why am I being bothered by this? The scar on his eye, which appears to have been a burn mark, is evident from the way he looked at him. Endeavor might have. Abruptly, she found herself at the train station, deep in contemplation. In an attempt to relax, she bought a train ticket and continued to walk with her head down. She got goosebumps all over her body as Endeavor's eyes flashed in her mind. She wanted to find out if Shoto, the boy, was all right. However, she had little chance of seeing him again unless she was accepted to the school she desired. She felt the ground beneath her foot abruptly disappear. The sensation of a big hand snatching her hand and violently pulling her back made her yell. She collapsed back into a chest that felt firm but brittle. A train sped by the spot where she would have fallen if she hadn't stopped right after. As she tipped her head back to gaze at the inverted face of a blond man with deeply sunken eyes, her heart was pounding wildly in her chest. This time, he gently drew her back a few paces. He gently reprimanded her, saying, Be careful there, young lady. You almost got turned into a pancake. At last, Nanami's mind appeared to comprehend what had transpired. She had almost fallen onto the train tracks in her worry for the boy she had met earlier. She turned to the man and felt her knees tremble. She bowed deeply and yelled, "Thank you for saving my life, sir." He tilted his head and nodded. "May I ask what occupied your mind so much you didn't realize you were about to walk off the station lines?" he asked. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to tell you," Nanami said, scowling and glancing at her shoes before turning to face the man. The bony stranger approached and took a seat on a bench. Grinning, he patted the seat next to him. "We have time until the next train." The man in question handed Nanami a soda as they sat on the bench. She took care to avoid mentioning the name of the concerned hero. All that was clear was that he was a man with a fire quirk. After hearing her story, the blonde stranger folded his arms thoughtfully. He summarized, "Ah, so you were concerned over a stranger." Frantically, Nanami shook her hand and shook her can. She looked at her can and mentally noted that she should wait to open it. "Why yes, but he was my age, and it's just," she said. "His father was so mean to me," and the boy looked so angry the second he spoke. There was just so much tension? Hatred? I don't know. Their eyes were so cold. I know it isn't my place to butt in, but she reached out a hand to cover her left eye. There was this horrible scar on his face. I can't help but notice that it looked like a burn, she continued. She noticed the man's clumsy yet kind smile when she glanced to the side. "Ah, I understand, you're concerned it's abuse?" he inquired. Nanami gave a nod. He extended his hand to her. "Yagi Toshinori." He introduced himself after saying that. Nanami glanced at his hand and blinked before accepting it. "Why Yoshino Nanami?" Leaning against the bench, Toshinori relaxed. "Yoshino Shoju, I have to say, you're quite the interesting one. You seem to have quite the intuition there. By chance are you hoping to be a hero?" he inquired. Gazing at her lap, Nanami pulled at her hair. "Yes, I'm applying for UA, but even though I'm training, I don't think I have much of a chance with my quirk." He cocked his head, perplexed. He inquired, "What do you mean?" She jabbed at her fingers. "My quirk is called misfortune. Basically I bring bad luck everywhere I go. I can pass it on to people or objects at will, but sometimes it leaks out without me meaning to." Her gaze softened. "Remember those boys, who got involved in the slime monster incident?" Recalling the moment he saved the two boys as all might, Toshinori nodded. He pretended to be unaware and said, "Ah yes, that was a month or two ago wasn't it?" Nanami's gaze grew softer. "It was my fault, I'm positive." Toshinori sat up, his skeleton-like face pressed into a frown. "Earlier, maybe just 20 or 30 minutes ahead of time, I had touched both of them, and even though I didn't mean to, I think my quirk got passed on to them. It can't be a coincidence that they both got into trouble not long after they met me," she murmured. She gave him a gentle smile. "I'm not giving up, but when things like this happen, it makes me doubt how I could become a hero. Let alone get into UA. A quirk like this is more fitting of a villain. It's a curse." She couldn't help but wonder why she was giving this man so much of herself. Simply put, it was simple. Toshinori shook his head and grinned. He surprised her by patting her head and saying, "Don't say things like that, Yoshino Shoju. Your quirk is only as useful as you make it. Maybe there's more to it. You have the heart of a hero, my girl. I think you'll do just fine if you learn to manage that quirk." He laughed. Grinning, he took his hand off her head. "Go ahead and apply to UA once they see that heroic spirit of yours. I'm sure you'll pass. A hero is strong in more than just physical strength. It's all about heart, and you've got plenty of that." He got up. "And don't blame yourself for that incident. Who knows, something good may have come out of it." Nanami put a hand to her head and then grinned slightly. When she saw the train, she stood. "Oja-san, I apologize if this sounds rude. But are you a teacher? I've never spoken so casually to a stranger before." The word, Oja-san, made Toshinori cringe, and he grinned slightly. "I actually just accepted my first teaching job, so I suppose you could say I am." Nanami bowed to him with a smile. After putting her soda in her bag and boarding the train, she stood up and waved to him, saying, "I appreciate your kind words. I will do my best to get into UA High. Even with this disadvantage I have." As he waved to her with a clear smile on his bony face, Nanami nodded her head in yet another tiny bow. "I can't give up, right? Heroes persevere." She pursed her lips and clung to the train as she looked up at the bars. On the subway, Nanami started performing half chin-ups in spite of the strange looks she was getting from other riders. She still needed to strengthen her upper body. POV shift Toshinori. He placed his hand on Toshinori's lap. As the train departed, he saw the ash blonde keep waving at him before catching a glimpse of her clinging to the high bars. He gazed up at the heavens. It appeared to be about to rain. Nodding to himself, he got up and brushed off his trousers. He laughed as he waited for his train. Well now, honestly that young lady would have been quite the candidate, if I hadn't already chosen Midoriya Shonen as my successor. All Might will have to give her credit eventually, though, if it was truly because of her peculiarity that we were able to meet. He smiled and closed his eyes. I believe that child is what they call a diamond in the rough. As Nanami swung on the recreation center's high beam, she mentally counted. She released her grip after making 3 complete circles, twisted in midair, and landed on her feet, stumbling forward a little before straightening up. She rubbed the back of her head sheepishly as her parents applauded her. Her father followed closely as her mother wheeled to her. She exclaimed, "Nanami, that was an excellent landing." She raised her daughter's bottle. "You've really improved your control there." Nanami looked at her mother appreciatively and grinned as she accepted it. She reached into her pockets and took out a small stone, saying, "Honestly, I never would have thought about using gymnastics to pursue my hero goal. I have to thank you for this, Mom." She turned to face her father and said, "And I'm definitely thanking you for this, Dad. Well, you were so excited when you told us about pouring your bad luck into a rock. I thought this would help. I even got it blessed at the shrine so that it can absorb more." "Yeah, I appreciate that," she said, holding the stone in the air. As the sun shone through it, the stone's blue hue turned to a vivid purple. She exhaled joyfully, "It's pretty too." Her father was about to say, "So how long does your bad luck typically stay in there?" when a ball struck his daughter in the head. "Oh, I see, it's already coming back, huh?" Holding her head in agony, Nanami knelt on the ground. OWW. Nanami double-knotted her shoes as she tied them. The school of her dreams was only a block away. She could not afford to throw away her training. She ignored her fear of getting lost because of her quirk and looked straight ahead. She noticed a familiar head of unruly green hair and slightly tightened her scarf. Excited, she rushed up to greet him by slapping his back. "Izukun," she cried out suddenly. After stumbling forward a little, Midoriya turned to face her and grinned. With his smile faltering at his small blunder, he said, "Yoshino Air. Nanami-san, are you ready?" Determinedly, Nanami balled her fists. "Definitely. I've been building up muscle, and I fall a lot less even with my quirk. These last 10 months were definitely not wasted," she gasped. Midoriya's enthusiasm caused her to blink. He tilted his head and said, "Same here. Is it me or are you a lot more upbeat than usual? I'm almost envious." Nanami gave a headshake. As if it were clear, she frowned and said, "Of course not. It's because it's Izukun, I can only talk to you like this." She grinned brightly and said, "When we talk, I just feel fired up." She turned to face an empty spot in the crowd and said, "I would get discouraged and then I'd be like, Izukun wouldn't give up. Then I just keep going." As she ran forward and performed a triple front flip, she made sure not to let her skirt fall. "It's because of you inspiring me to train that I can do this," she exclaimed. She turned to him expectantly and landed with her feet together. Midoriya, whose cheeks were flushed from the unceasing praise, watched in awe. "Geez, now I'm getting excited too." He gave his companion a confident smile. With an excited nod, Nanami said, "This is it, our first steps to becoming heroes. Watch me take it." She then turned pale as she saw Midoriya trip over his own foot. Or simply watch me perish. Shamefully, he thought. Nanami closed her eyes, waiting for Midoriya to hit the floor with the inevitable thud. When it didn't arrive, she opened one eye to see Midoriya floating just above the ground, panicking. She saw him being gently put down by a brunette girl. With a quiet sigh, she hurried over to her friend with the curly hair. The girl chirped happily, "That's my quirk. I hope you don't mind me using it without permission. But it'd be unlucky if you fell." The word, unlucky, made Nanami feel like an invisible arrow was shooting through her. Grinning, the girl turned to face the school. She questioned, "Isn't this exciting?" When Nanami saw her friend straining to find the right words to respond to the vivacious girl, she winced. She said, "Well, let's do our best. See ya." Before turning to leave, she quickly apologized as she went on, brushing shoulders with Nanami. Nanami took a step toward the boy with the green hair. "Izukun, are you okay?" "Sorry, you probably fell because of my," she said. With a shudder, Midoriya turned to her with excitement. He yelled, "Did you see that? I talked to a girl." Nanami puckered her lips in disgust and deadpanned. "I'm a girl. Does he not remember that?" In addition, he remained silent despite appearing content. "I'll just keep this to myself." She acknowledged his excitement with a nod, trying to conceal her disappointment. "You sure did, interact with her." Nanami glanced at the seat numbers as she walked through the auditorium. She was seated next to a handsome, but stern-looking, boy wearing glasses, and her number was 7112. She was astounded by the sheer number of students who had applied. Although she noticed some intriguing people walking by, she didn't try to strike up a conversation. She made eye contact with a boy who appeared exhausted. His wild purple hair reminded her of someone, so she tilted her head. He stared at her, and she gave him a nervous smile before he left. She paused, then fumbled with her card. Area C was displayed. The lights went out as the auditorium filled. When Nanami saw Present Mike, the voice hero, she rubbed her eyes. A few rows behind her, she could hear Bakugo and Midoriya conversing in a faint voice. The knowledge that the green-haired boy was nearby gave her a quiet sense of comfort, and her shoulders relaxed. But not Bakugo. She had yet to give him a coat. The boy sitting next to her abruptly got up and held up his hand as she was listening to the hero in front of her. He asked a lengthy question about the number of fake villains, but she thought it was unnecessary because it probably would have been answered if he had been patient. She started to get worried when he turned back to Midoriya. In addition, you with the curly hair. You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting. If you are simply here for leisure, I urge you to leave immediately. Panicked at being the center of attention, Nanami frowned as she watched Midoriya apologize. What's up with this guy? Izukun remained relatively silent, and that's what's distracting him. Is he some sort of bully? Her frown widened as she contemplated bringing misfortune upon the noisy boy. She sighed and kept her attention on what was being said. No, Nanami. I'm sure he's just uptight. She felt awkward sitting next to him and pulled at her hair. When the presentation ended, she saw everyone around her stand up. She looked at the boy next to her, arguing as he started to walk away. She took a breath, then squeezed his sleeve and closed her eyes. He turned to her and stood rigid. He said, "Can I help you?" Nanami looked incredulously at her hand before releasing it. She thought timidly, but I want to stand up for Izukun. Confrontation is so terrifying. She glanced up at the man standing stiffly. She stumbled. I want you to apologize to my friend, she said softly. The boy scowled. Excuse me? Do you mean the curly-haired boy? Nanami gave a slight nod. What you did was, it was mean and you unnecessary, she said, anxiousness burning in her face. Heroes can't expect, she said, her heart pounding harshly in her chest. They can't expect a controlled environment. So for you to get distracted by Izukun's muttering shows how you'll be in wilder situations. She tightened her grip. And why you were way more distracting too, so you should apologize, she yelled. The boy's eyes were wide as he gazed at her. Nanami was momentarily intimidated by his intense gaze. In a strange, mechanical way, he raised his arm high. With her eyes closed, Nanami prepared herself for what appeared to be an impending slap. Rather, she discovered the boy was extending his hand to her in a courteous manner. He inquired, "What is your name?" Nanami gave a blink. With caution, she answered without taking his hand, "Yoshino Nanami." He gave her a firm nod before leaving. "Yoshino Nanami. I am Iida Tenya. The things you have said were very persuasive. If that boy with the unkempt hair does well in the exam, I shall thoroughly apologize." Nanami could not help but envy the young man's enthusiasm. She walked to the bus that took her to her designated zone while shaking her head. Frustrated, Nanami held a broken pipe she had discovered. She saw the fictitious city being torn apart by all the robotic villains. The people around her were clearly far ahead of her, even though she had scored 10 points by using her pipe, which was infused with bad luck, to smash gaps in the one-pointers. As she ran, she whimpered, how do they expect people with a terrible quirk like mine to be noticed? I can't imagine how Izukun is doing." She pulled her hair when she saw a three-pointer. This was her chance. No one else was around. When the robot slammed its arm at her, Nanami rushed up to it and leapt to her feet. She turned it over on its back and gripped it. She carefully poured her bad luck into it. The robot staggered backwards as it tried to throw her away. Holding on tight, Nanami reached for her pipe and pressed it into its crimson eye. It started to stutter toward a fallen line, practically dripping with electricity, and she tightened her hold. She jumped off without taking her pipe with her as her eyes widened. After falling, the three-pointer swiftly short-circuited. 13 points, still stuck in the robot's eye. She glanced at her pipe. She would undoubtedly be electrocuted if she touched it now. She swore to herself, shoot, now, what am I going to do? A voice said, "Did you need that pipe?" When Nanami looked back, she saw a gregarious-looking boy with blonde hair that had a noticeable black streak. She glanced at him and then back at the pipe, tilting her head. She scowled and then sighed and nodded. My quirk isn't good for this kind of enemy. I need it, but I'll get, she murmured. The boy approached the robot, and she watched. Hey wait, you'll get electrocuted. As he swiftly removed the pipe, the boy leapt back at the sparks that flew. The pipe was in her hand when he approached her and said, "Don't worry, this isn't something that bothers me too much. Here ya go. How about after this we get some lunch? Seems fair since I helped you, right?" The unexpected invitation made Nanami flush, and then she looked up and screamed. The boy was pushed aside by some large fallen debris as she hurled herself at him. Looking back, she saw the extent of the damage and sat up. To say that the enormous rock would have seriously hurt them would be an understatement. I mean I like your enthusiasm, but now isn't really the time for this. Besides, I'm pretty sure there are cameras everywhere. Nanami looked down and blinked. When she realized she was essentially straddling this total stranger, she flushed deeply. Despite his protests, she screamed and leapt off of him, grabbing her pipe and fleeing. How humiliating. I hope that doesn't get out to my parents. She shook her head and gripped her pipe. Focus, Nanami. Only a few minutes left and you only have 13 points. Unlucky 13, she said to herself. Pale, she glanced around, seeing that most of the robots had been claimed. In a desperate attempt to find one more robot, she ran. The words, 2 minutes left, were heard by present Mike. Nanami started to look more frantically, and her eyes grew wide. Not at all. No unaltered robots were in sight. The ground started to tremble abruptly. The quake's sheer force made her jump, then she raised her head. A large robot that easily towered over the buildings. The obvious zero-pointer. Nanami nearly dropped her pipe at the sight of it. The beast lifted its arm and let out a terrifying sound as it slammed its fist to the ground. The ground shook again, violently enough that Nanami and many others were thrown into the air along with large chunks of debris. She landed ungracefully on her side, scraping her hand in the process. Many students screamed and ran from the monster. She got up to do the same, hissing in pain. She made it only a few steps before she heard it. My leg is caught. Nanami stopped and turned around. She saw the tired-looking boy from earlier. He was caught under the debris. His leg was painfully pinned under a number of large rocks. Nanami looked around waiting for one of the others with a stronger quirk to help him. However, they all were too busy running from the slowly approaching zero-pointer. Under her breath, she swore. Looking down at her pipe, she growled and ran up to him. Hey, are you okay? I'll get you out, I promise. In a secluded surveillance room sat many heroes. All might. Neither of the two you're watching seems to be doing particularly well. A mouse-like creature observed. Just wait, Principal Nezu. There's something special about those two. Toshinori murmured in amusement. He watched as his successor jumped into the air, attacking the zero-pointer to save a young girl. One has an unmatchable sense of self-sacrifice. Nezu sipped his tea as he watched the display. He found himself cheering for the boy. He turned to look at another of the many screens. He saw the rather unremarkable by comparison display of Nanami trying to pull the boy from the debris. And the other, he asks quizzically. Toshinori smiled. Her tuition is on point, but I would like to see what she does in this kind of situation. Nanami groaned as she fell back from trying to pull him out. Just get out of here. That thing is almost here. I'll be fine. They'll stop it before it steps on me for sure. Besides, you don't even know me, the tired-looking boy insisted. Nanami shook her head and jammed her pipe under the large rock pinning him. She attempted to pry it off of him. You're hurt. What kind of hero would I be if I left you? It doesn't matter if I know you or not, she grunted as she pushed down on the pipe. NGH, her hand stung in pain from when she fell earlier. Damn it, misfortune. Why does it have to be misfortune? Why couldn't I have a useful quirk? She cried out as her hand bled onto the pipe. The wild-haired boy's eyes widened. Your quirk is called misfortune? Nanami growled as she tried to pull her weight down onto the pipe. Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? I bring bad luck wherever I... Suddenly Nanami stopped. Her mind fell blank as she loosened her grip on the pipe. Run away, was the simple command that rang in her head. Nanami let go of the pipe, turned around, and sprinted away from the pinned boy. Why am I running? Where am I going? My body won't listen to me. He needs help. Turn back. Stop. Stop. She thought to herself furiously. What's wrong with me? Stop. The boy watched, sighing as he waited for the robot to stop. He winced as the shaking from its footsteps shook the rubble and further pinned his possibly broken leg. He watched the girl's retreating figure. His eyes widened when she tripped over nothing with a solid thud. He cursed to himself as he watched her look around before locking eyes with him. What just? Nanami muttered. She looked at her hand and flexed it. She was back in control. She looked at the 0-pointer. It was still far but was closing in. Nanami looked at the pipe that was wedged at an angle under the rock. She scowled and got up and began digging through her pocket. She pulled out her stone and focused as much bad luck into it as possible. She set it down and took a few steps back. She ran forward, arms raised. Falling into a cartwheel, she ignored the stinging pain in her hand and sighed. Using her momentum, she transitioned into front flips. She kept her eyes on the pipe. This will take a lot of precision and luck. I'm terrible with both of those things. But still, she thought desperately. She planted her hands firmly on the ground and launched herself into the air. She tucked her legs into her chest as she aimed her body. I will definitely save you. Sticking both legs out, she slammed all her weight down onto the pipe, effectively lifting the rock enough for the boy to crawl out. She stumbled off of it and looked at him. His sweats were torn on his legs and there was a nasty bruise on his left one. Her eyes widened. That worked, I saved someone. She looked at his leg and cringed at the sight of the injury. That looks bad, can you walk? She asked tenderly, helping him stand. She wrapped on his arms around her shoulder to further support him. Yeah, I guess. He muttered. Do you have a lot of points? Is that why you came back? He asked, rubbing his free hand against the back of his neck. Nanami bit her lip and looked to the side, a nervous smile on her face. Yeah totally, I'm practically a shoo-in. The lie was obvious and she knew it. She turned to look at him, before smiling sheepishly. Let's not worry about that, okay? She walked him over to her stone, picking it up and setting it in her pocket. And 'tis up. Nanami walked into the waiting room. Her hand had been properly bandaged by Recovery Girl, though she declined treatment for her side and was left with a nasty bruise. She carried a tray to a table where the wild-haired boy, who later introduced himself as Shinso Hitoshi, was waiting. Has Recovery Girl seen you yet? She asked as she set down a cup of tea. Shinso looked at the cup she placed in front of him and shook his head. No, she's currently working her way around. She'll be with me soon though. Are you waiting for a friend, Yoshino? He asked. She nodded as she looked around, searching for an empty seat anywhere other than with him. You can sit here if you want, I guess. Nanami laughed nervously and began fiddling with her stone. That's probably not a good idea. You might get even more hurt just by sitting with me. Remember, misfortune. It's a terrible quirk that's probably more fit for a villain. Ya know? She chuckled dryly. Quickly contradicting herself, she pulled out the chair and wordlessly sat down next to him with a blank stare. After a moment she relaxed her shoulders and began anxiously looking around. Wait, what? What just? My quirk is brainwashing. If you reply to me I can make you do anything I want. He rested his elbow on the table and leaned his head against his hand. That's what I call a terrible quirk fit for a villain. He took his cup of tea and took a sip. But I still want to be a hero. You're the same, right? He asked. Nanami hesitated before nodding her head yes. He smiled a dry and tired smile. It's all right. I'm not going to use my quirk on you again. I guess I feel a kinship with you. Sorry, I just wanted to show you your quirk isn't the worst around. Nanami tilted her head and looked up at the ceiling. I think your quirk is cool. It would be so helpful in a hostage situation. She smiled at him. I'm still trying to figure out how my quirk will be useful, but if I by some miracle make it in, I'll learn how to use it productively. Shinso stared at her, before looking away and rubbing his neck. You're surprisingly positive about this. Without warning, a third chair was pulled over, and a solid thud was heard as a head met the table. Nanami jumped and scooted closer to Shinso to make room. She tilted her head and poked the side of the person who had placed themselves next to her. Izukun, are you all right? She asked. Midoriya looked up at her, an unreasonable amount of tears flowing from his eyes. 0 points. Nanami-san, I don't think I can keep our promise, he cried. Nanami cringed and patted his fluffy head, though found there was too much volume for her to feel his head under her hand. It was worth a shot, Izukun. Honestly, they really didn't consider their quirkless applicants when they made this exam, did they? She sighed. Shinso narrowed his eyes at the sight of Izuku tensing. About that, my quirk did manifest, finally, but I couldn't use it right and I still ended up with a big fat 0. He dropped his head onto the table again, causing Nanami and Shinso to jump, as the thud from this drop was much harder than the previous. There are other hero schools. If you have a quirk now, you stand a better chance, right? What about Shiketsu High? I heard they're pretty comparable to UA, she offered. Midoriya peeked at her before looking down at the table. Oh, did you choose a different hero school? Shinso lifted his head from his hand, frowning. Did you only apply to UA? That's stupid, you should always have a backup plan. Midoriya groaned into his hands. But I promised Nanami we'd meet at UA, wouldn't it make me a liar if I applied somewhere else? Nanami shrieked and grabbed him by the shirt. She furiously shook him, rocking his whole body back and forth. Are you insane? This is your future we're talking about. I wouldn't have gotten mad if you applied to another hero school. I don't even think other schools are accepting applications right now. I should have made the promise more vague. She let him go and put her hands to her cheeks in horror. Oh God, what if it's my fault? I shouldn't have slapped your back this morning. What if that's why you didn't get any points even with a quirk? No, it's not your fault, Midoriya exclaimed. I was too slow. If I was faster this wouldn't have happened. I only have 13 points. Nanami cried. Shinso and Midoriya's eyes widened. What? They cried in unison. Nanami's eyes watered as she nodded her head. I was hoping you somehow did better than me so at least one of us would get in. I'm sorry Izuku, I failed you. She let her head fall onto the table. I'm a promise breaker. And she proceeded to wail into her arms. Oh no, please don't cry. I'm sorry, I should have tried harder. I broke the promise more than you. At least you got some points. I didn't get any at all. Midoriya wailed as he proceeded to cry into his hands. Shinso slowly sank down into his seat, trying to hide his face with his hands as they received quizzical stares from other applicants and adults. Stuck at a table with two loudly crying teens, the tired boy just wanted to disappear. These two are exhausting. Izuku, honey, are you okay? Why are you smiling at that fish? Izuku glanced at his worried mother and blinked. No, I'm okay. He sighed softly and continued to eat. He put his fish down and played with his fingers, saying, I'm just feeling a little guilty, you know? I got a 0, after just barely passing the written exam. I promised Nanami-san, but I don't think I got in. Nanami, Yoshino, right? Is she your girlfriend? You talk about her a lot, Inko said. Izuku snapped his chopsticks while staring at his mother. As she said awkwardly, no. Sorry, that may have been a rash assumption. With a flush, Izuku got to his feet. He threw the broken chopsticks in the trash and got a new pair, saying, she's not my girlfriend. She's just my friend that happens to be a girl. It just bothers me. I finally have a quirk and I might not even get to learn how to use it. Oh Izuku. Inko approached her son and took his face in her hands while grinning. She kissed his forehead and nodded reassuringly, saying, it'll be okay. Even if you don't get into UA, you'll always be my hero. Now come finish your dinner. Izuku nodded and grinned slightly. With a whisper, he said, yeah, thanks mom. Before entering a clothes store, Nanami took another look at the number of yen in her wallet. She had on the jacket that Bakugo had given her. Admittedly, she liked the fireplace scent it provided, and the additional room inside made her feel cozier and more comfortable. She wandered the store in search of the coat's original model. When she couldn't find the color she needed, she scowled as she looked around. She approached an associate, whining. She hesitated for a moment before tapping the person's hand. Excuse me, do you she said, making an awkward gesture toward her jacket. Quietly, she said, this jacket, in a dark yellow. The associate, a bob-cut young woman, leaned down to inspect the jacket and then gave an apologetic smile. Sorry sweetie, we just sold the last one and that color has been discontinued, she replied. She hurried back when she saw Nanami tremble and cry. We have a similar jacket in dark blue. How's that sound? Nanami glanced at her wallet before reluctantly nodding. Okay, I think he'd look good in dark blue. The client scowled and straightened up. She inquired worriedly, is this for your boyfriend? Why are you so scared, is he hurting you? She whispered to her while glancing around. Should I call the police? Nanami gave her a startled look and blinked. She grinned gratefully and shook her head. Her sleeve was held up for the woman to see. No, thank you. You see she said. This boy lent this to me when I was cold, and my mom accidentally washed it with a red shirt. So I promised to replace it. She paused. She pursed her lips and took another look at the jacket. We aren't close, but he yells a lot and I don't want him to be mad, she said. He's kinda scary but I don't think he'd hurt me. Oh, muttered the associate. She grinned and nodded. Nanami turned to face the tag and asked, what size do you need? Okay. I think we have one in this size in the back. Wait here, it'll be a bit. Nanami grinned and nodded as she waited for her to disappear. She pulled out her phone in a hurry. She texted Izuku after choosing his number. Izuku-kun, if I buy a different jacket than the one Bakugo-kun wanted would he get angry with me? She awaited an answer. She opened the message when her phone rang. Izukun, I don't think Kachan will explode you as long as you replace the jacket, but he probably will get mad at you and most likely will yell a lot. That's really all I can say for sure, with an apology emoji. At this reply, Nanami went pale. She was pulling at her hair and perspiring profusely. Come on, this is a new level of unlucky. Shoot, shoot. Not even in the same color. Will he just yell at me, really? Anxiously, she thought. When the associate returned with the jacket, she looked up and bit her bottom lip. When Nanami saw the new one, her tense shoulders instantly relaxed. With the exception of color and a few extra pockets, it was remarkably similar to the previous one. Thank you, she said, flinching at the price on the tag. 23,000 yen, she sighed as she rummaged through her wallet. That's about everything I have. Is this the closest you have? The associate gave a pitying smile. Sorry, it is. I asked my manager and managed to get you a 2,000 yen discount, but that's the best I could do. Nanami nodded and let out a sigh. She bowed to the gracious woman and proceeded to the register to pay for the jacket, saying, It's fine, I understand. I'll buy it. She stared into the bag and started to reflect as she walked away. I wonder whether Izukun is aware of Kachan's, Bakugo-kun's, home. With a heavy sigh, Nanami left the shop. Izukun, do you know where Bakugo-kun lives? I want to give him the jacket quickly and get this over with. Izuku gave the address right away. Nanami promptly obtained directions and proceeded toward the Bakugo residence. She continued to pour as much of her misfortune into her stone with her hand. The most terrifying person she had ever met was about to confront her. She needed no more misfortune. Change POV that day. Mitsuki Bakugo hummed while making a hot curry for lunch. The sound of an explosion from upstairs made her eye twitch. She shouted angrily, Damn it Katsuki! Don't use your quirk in the house, instead. Her son responded, Oh shut up you hag, it wasn't on purpose, against her. Mitsuki gave the curry a scowl. That damn brat. If we weren't celebrating his getting into UA, I'd make this curry freaking mild just to spite him. She exhaled. Masaru, her husband, laughed at his wife's irritability. Contentedly, he read his newspaper. You know, you could just read the news on your phone, right? The newspaper is so old-fashioned, she said. Maybe, but there's something satisfying about turning the physical page. He laughed. He stood up when the doorbell rang. He folded his paper, put it aside, and then stood up to respond, saying, Oh, maybe that's my package, I'll get it. He was bewildered when he didn't see someone right away when he peered through the peephole. Looking down as he opened the door, he saw a small girl with hair the same color as his son and wife. Oh hello, did you need something? With a start, the young girl glanced up at him. Her voice was timid as she asked, Is Bakugo-kun here? She stopped, tugged at her hair, and glanced at her shoes. Oh wait, I suppose everyone here is Bakugo-kun. That would be confusing. Katsuki-kun. Is he here? She inquired. Masaru's head cocked. He shut the door after the girl nodded and said, just 1 second. Mitsuki called out from the kitchen, Who is it? Incredulously, he responded, It's a girl, she's asking for Katsuki. Mitsuki was stirring the curry with a ladle when she dropped it. When her husband nodded, she smiled slightly and said, A girl for Katsuki. Our Katsuki. After shutting off the stove, she hurried to the stairs. Katsuki, get down here. What for? I'm fucking busy. Watch your damn mouth and get down here. There's a girl asking for you. Change POV. The yelling coming from the other side of the door made Nanami wince. She made an effort to fill her stone with more misfortune, but it appeared that she was currently lacking in luck. However, considering how stressed she is right now, it would most likely come back to her soon. The Bakugo house was as noisy and threatening as she had anticipated. Nanami straightened her skirt and tugged at her hair. Perhaps I ought to have changed my jacket. Bakugo-kun would likely be upset. She glanced at the bag she was holding and noticed that, despite the cold, she was perspiring. She tensed as the door opened and a beautiful young woman emerged, saying, I hope he likes this. She said courteously, Katsuki will be down in just a second. It's really cold, why don't you come in? Startled by the invitation, Nanami blinked but removed her shoes before going inside. She was struck by the chic dynamic of the interior design as she surveyed the house. She was fascinated by the numerous fashion magazines and design books that were arranged on the shelves of the large bookshelf in the living room. The young woman who escorted her to the couch and offered her a cup of tea caught her eye. Meekly, she said, Iito, Onisan? Is now a bad time? I can come back later? She laughed at Nanami's wide eyes and said, "Oh ho, Oni-san huh? You're quite the flatterer kid. I'll have you know, I'm Katsuki's mother." Her friendly demeanor made Nanami smile a little. "Oh, but of course, I won't stop you from calling me Oni-san, haha, I actually would prefer it," Nanami said. "What's your name, short stack?" She bowed and said, I'm Yoshino Nanami. It's nice to meet you." Katsuki's father, who was seated on the other couch, grinned and said, "Yoshino-chan then." As he picked up his newspaper, he gestured to the cup in front of her and said, "Katsuki won't be long, have some tea while you wait." Mitsuki combed through her unkempt hair. He sneered, "Damn brat never comes when you call him. Katsuki, you better hurry up or I'll tell this nice girl that you're jerking off or something." Nanami almost choked on her tea as her face turned red. "An awkward, Mitsuki please," was Masaru's statement. Katsuki descended the stairs with a bang. He turned to face Nanami in the living room and said, "What the hell is wrong with you? Don't yell something like that, you hag." His back was to him. "Who the hell is it anyway?" Nanami turned slowly and smiled weakly and tearfully at him. Hi Bakugo-kun. Katsuki's shoulders slumped and his eyebrows twitched in recognition. "Oh, it's you, Freckles." Nanami scowled. This was not overlooked. "Hey, didn't I tell you to stop calling people by their features? She'll hate you if you keep calling her that. Use her name." Mitsuki began to scream. Trying to recall what Deku had called Nanami, he glared at her after glaring at his mother. What was her name? Something like Nana. Nanako? Nanami? Whoa, I have no idea what her last name is. With a grunt, he raised his chin. Instead of taking the chance of mispronouncing her name in front of his mother, he opted to ask sternly, "What do you want, Nana?" Nanami winced. "What, Nana?" Incredulously, she thought. She got to her feet and picked up the bag that lay next to her. She swallowed and approached him after going around the couch. At arm's length, she held the bag up to him. She said, rather loudly, "It isn't the same but it's still a nice one, they were out of the one I ruined, so I got this instead." Her doe eyes gazed up at him as she pulled the bag back up, concealing the lower half of her face. Meekly, she begged, It's a bit more expensive. I hope you'll still forgive me." When the bag was almost thrust into Katsuki's face, he took a step back, but before he could reach for it, it was pulled away. Even though he thought this was annoying, he couldn't scream at the blonde girl because of her pitiful expression. With a frown, he grabbed the bag from her and took out the dark blue jacket to examine it. Mitsuki gave a grateful hum. She slapped Nanami's back without waiting for a response, saying, "Hey, Masaru isn't that the brand of the company you work at? Gotta say, you've got good taste, kid." After a tense laugh at the compliment, Nanami turned warily to face Katsuki. She was worried because she couldn't tell from his expression whether he liked the jacket or not. She cleared her throat and spoke after hesitating. She said softly, Kachan Bakugo-kun." As he started to put the jacket on, he corrected without thinking, "Katsuki." He slightly bowed his arm in it. He glared at her, a mark of irk growing on his head. "What, are you deaf? It's fucking weird if I'm calling you by your first name and you're calling me by my last. And like hell am I letting you call me by that nerd's stupid nickname? Call me Katsuki. Damn it." He screamed. Nanami instantly nodded and screamed. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and sighed. He removed it with a sigh, saying, "HMPH. I guess I'll accept this." "Fine, I accept your payment. You're off the hook, is that all you're here for?" Nanami's lips were pursed. There was nothing else she said that seemed to pique his genuine interest. When Mitsuki gave him a hard slap on the back of his head, she jumped. The woman tugged at her son's cheeks angrily, saying, "Your girlfriend came all the way here to give you an expensive gift and all you say is that all you're here for? Where the hell is your tact? Ask her to stay for dinner, you brat." He screamed, "Get off of me, you crazy hag. She isn't my girlfriend, goddammit," but was met with another slap. "Ow, fuck, quit hitting me." Nanami had crept over to the door. A smoking hand settled itself firmly on her shoulder just as she had put her hand on the knob. She stiffened, slowly turning her head to see Katsuki's irascible expression. He snarled, "You're staying for dinner, got it?" Nanami nodded and whimpered. She forced a tense smile onto her face and said, "Why yes sir, I couldn't have been prepared for this with any amount of luck manipulation." Sakura hummed as she pulled weeds in the garden using her quirk. With a warm smile, the mail carrier gave her a few letters. Sorting through the letters in her lawn, she hurriedly locked her wheelchair. When she noticed a unique seal on a letter, Her eyes widened and she exclaimed, Bill, junk, wait what? Why Yue? She exclaimed as she rolled inside her chair after unlocking it. Hajime, where's Nanami? Hajime, his anxious wife, peered out from the kitchen. Nanami is having dinner at her friend's house. What's the matter? She got a letter. From Yue. Look, she exclaimed as she held it up and gestured enthusiastically toward the seal. After a lengthy pause, both parents quickly grabbed their phones and give their daughter a call. Change POV. Nanami's phone vibrated wildly as she jumped at the dinner table. All eyes were suddenly on her, and she sank into her chair, flushed. She whispered, excuse me. Masaru laughed and said, it's okay. Dinner isn't ready yet anyway. Nanami left the table with a slight bow. She went outside to answer the phone. Hello. When her mother shouted into her ear, Nanami, your test results came in. She was thrilled. Do you want to come home to read it or do you want me to do it for you? Nanami paused. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and put her hand in her pocket to squeeze her stone. Will you read it, Mom? As she heard her mother mumbling, she tugged her hair and heard the envelope being torn. Gotcha. Wow, what a long letter. Oh, here's your score. You got 13 battle points and 48 rescue points. Nanami, they're accepting you into UA. Nanami's eyes widened and she dropped her phone. She could hear her father's voice in the distance, and she could hear her mother calling for her. The door was opened by Katsuki. When she ignored him and picked up her phone, he scowled and said, Hey Nana, the food's done and the hag says we can't eat until you're done with your call. Wrap it up already. She exclaimed with excitement, Mom, are you serious? I did? I actually got accepted? Really? It's not a dream, is it? Her dad picked up the telephone and answered. You got into Class 1A. Nanami, you're amazing. Nanami started to squeal. Then she hung up, saying, Okay, I have to go now, but I'll call you back. She trembled with excitement and clenched her fists. Oh my god. Katsuki's irk mark appeared on his head. He took hold of her shoulder and whirled her around, saying, What the hell, don't you fucking ignore me. When he saw her crying, he winced. Hey, why are you always crying? You're as bad as Deku. Full of vitality, Nanami leapt to her feet and threw her arms around his neck, making him bend forward to prevent them from falling back. He stood up straight and looked down at her as his face flushed bright red. She essentially hung from his neck as a result, forcing her to balance on her toes. Katsuki, it's amazing. I got into the hero course at UA. She burst into tears. When Katsuki heard her, he placed his hands on her arms to pry her away. A look of confusion came over her face. What? Wait, how? Aren't you? Mitsuki was leaning against the door when the two teenagers turned around and said, Oh, that's what the call was about. Congrats, you want some celebratory pudding? She emphasized her catty smile by putting a hand to her mouth. Or should I wait for you lovebirds to wrap it up? With a flush, Nanami looked directly at Katsuki. They realized they were essentially in what appeared to be a lover's embrace as they gazed at each other's arms. They became enraged and pushed one another away. We aren't lovebirds. I was just excited, she said, avoiding eye contact with Katsuki as she entered and took a seat. A plate of curry was already prepared for her. I was sure I wouldn't get in. Not with my terrible quirk. It really is a miracle. Hit the table with a little explosion across from her and yelled, For fuck's sake, time out Freckles. I thought you said you were quirkless? The hell are you doing? With a wince, Nanami drew back into her chair. Mitsuki gave her son an ear yank. Damn it Katsuki, I told you no quirks in the house. And I said to use her name or she's gonna hate you. Do your ears not work? She yelled. Masaru gave a cautious wave. Careful now, don't scare our guest please. At his father, he yelled, Quiet you clown. Katsuki rubbed his now red ear and pushed her hand away. He yelled angrily, Who the hell do you think you are? Lying to me like that? You said you were quirkless? Who lies about something so stupid? Nanami's happy mood was ruined as she glared down at her lap. With her fists shaking beneath the table, she glared at him and said, I never said that. Why you assumed? All I said was, I don't have a power that would make things easy. I have an annoying quirk, but I'm not quirkless. Mitsuki laughed. You made a snap judgment once more, Katsuki? So uncool. She made fun of it. The table ate their dinner in silence as Katsuki snarled. Nanami rubbed her chest. The spicy food was delicious, but she could already feel the heartburn. She looked sideways, uneasy to see Katsuki walking next to her. You're walking me home, but why? The ecstatic teenager was already in a foul mood, so she didn't want to exacerbate it by coming across as irritated, so she asked shyly. Oh, please stop talking. If I didn't take you home, the hag would be screaming all the time. It's dumb, in my opinion. This is such a pain. Why the fuck did you agree to stay and eat? He complained, glancing at his watch. Nanami kicked a pebble on the sidewalk while pulling her hair. Your mom is kind of scary. She's nice, but I thought she'd yell at me if I refused, she acknowledged. After a moment, she glanced up at him. Katsuki-kun, do you? He complained, you don't hear me calling you Nana-chan, just stick to Katsuki. Taking note that he disliked honorifics, Nanami nodded. She whispered, do you hate Izukun? It's not my business, but I just don't understand why you're so mean to him when he doesn't really do anything to you. He scowled at her and said, you're right, it isn't your business. Don't get the impression that we're friends, got it, Freckles? He grumbled. Deku doesn't know his place, and it pisses me off. His place is beneath me, but he keeps trying to get ahead. A quirkless loser trying to be a hero makes no sense. What the hell could he do? Disagreeing, Nanami scowled and pulled her hair. Why in the world does this guy think this way? The lust made her hand twitch, unlucky for him. No, calm him down. I say, there's no need for quirks here, but I hope he agrees. She pondered. She cautiously whispered, what gives you the right to decide that? Katsuki grunted, scowling. She felt herself becoming agitated. What gives you the right to decide what he can and can't do? Just because he didn't have a quirk, she said. She turned and faced him, saying, Izukun tries so much harder than anyone I've ever met. And you're so privileged. He stumbled backwards as she pushed him with her hands on his chest and said, you're a privileged bully. You're good looking, you have a strong quirk, and you probably get praised for everything you do. I bet you haven't worked hard for a thing in your life. Deku this, Deku that. If he is so beneath you, why are you so obsessed with him? Having a quirk isn't always such a great thing, you know. It doesn't guarantee automatic success. With a growl, Katsuki grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her into an alley. His hand slammed next to her head. The smell of smoke from the side of Nanami's face made her tense. It's funny how you act all shy and cute when it turns out you actually have a big fucking mouth. Do yourself a favor and don't butt into other people's business, he barked. If you want to pick a fight, then let's fucking go. Don't think I'll go easy on you just because you're a girl. His blood-red eyes pierced through Nanami, causing her body to tremble. I'm terrified. No, that's not right. She gave him a fierce look. I'm furious. God, I'll count myself lucky if I survive this. Still, I want to be a hero. Bullies are confronted by heroes. She grasped one unsteady hand and placed it on his arm, applying pressure. Izukun is my friend. You bullying him is my business, she murmured. He grinned and said, a bully, huh? Aren't you high and mighty? I don't get why you're encouraging him so damn much. Deku doesn't have a quirk. He'd die on his first mission if he made it by some fucking miracle. You remember that stupid sludge incident, right? He ran in without a quirk like a fucking dumbass. The damn nerd doesn't know when to give up, and it's shit like that that pisses me off. If I don't put him in his place at the bottom of the food chain, no one fucking will. Nanami gave a blink. Both her shoulders and her hold on his arm eased. Does he have a severe case of superiority complex, or does he genuinely care? However, her expression softened as she mentioned the sludge monster incident. She muttered, that's right, I never apologized for that. Wait, what? She placed her other hand on his arm and slid both of them down until she was holding his hand, saying, no, it's nothing. She had a confused look on her face. Softly, hey, Katsuki, she said. Are you actually okay? Since that incident? I never got to ask you. Katsuki's expression changed from anger to bewilderment. Huh? He narrowed his eyes at her and glanced at their hands. The back of Nanami's head developed an irk mark. The fuck, how short is your attention span, Freckles? Switching from talking about Deku then moving over to me. He withdrew his hand from her and said, don't ask stupid questions. What are you, the therapy hero now? This gave Nanami the chance to slide off the wall he had previously pinned her to. I wouldn't be surprised if you needed a therapist, she murmured. She pulled at her hair and sighed. She stuffed her hands in her pockets and said, God, I tried to talk to you and figure you out, and I just ended up angry with more questions. As he passed her, he complained, don't try and figure me out, that's freaking weird. He turned back to her and tilted his head up in what Nanami would only characterize as the most arrogant, snobbish way imaginable. By the way, I got into class 1A2. This makes you my stepping stone. I'm going to be number 1, and you'll be stuck in my shadow. Nanami's head cocked. She passed him on her way to the house and asked, "Why is everything a competition for you?" She turned to face him and grinned, saying, "I only want to become a pro hero. And one day I'll rescue you and you'll have to thank me. Because that nasty attitude of yours is going to get you in trouble one day." His hand crackled with tiny explosions, leaving an irk mark on his head. He sneered, "Oh fuck off, Freckles." He walked next to her. After pausing to glance at the road, he took her arm and dragged her farther away from it, to the inside of the sidewalk. "The fuck is your name again?" Angrily, Nanami pulled at her hair. "I can't really be angry because for the first 2 months that I knew him, I didn't know his name, Yoshino Nanami." He whispered, "Too long. I'll stick to Nana." She raised an eyebrow. Then why did he ask? Early in the morning, Nanami, wearing her new UA uniform, screamed as she fled from a furious dog. As she continued to run, she cried out, "Oh my god, this is why I'm a cat person, someone help." Even though the dog wasn't very big, it still had teeth and an attitude. The dog ignored the food that had fallen and continued chasing her after she ran into a food stand. "Gaw, I'm sorry, I promise I'll pay damages." As she got closer to UA, people made room, but many chose to record on their phones instead of helping the poor girl. She started to run more quickly after the dog let out a loud bark. Nanami searched for a hiding spot. When she realized she was on school property and that countless students were watching her as she fled from this medium-sized, snarling monster, her eyes widened. How embarrassing. She noticed a big tree when she looked around once more. "Here goes." She hurried and leapt to her feet, clinging to a strong branch. She started swinging back and forth until her momentum allowed her to get up on the branch. She took a seat and gave the irate dog a fierce look. She looked at her hands and saw that she was quite badly cut by the rough bark of the branch. "Geez, I left early and everything," she said. "Ouch," she hissed in pain and hid her hands under her armpits. She gave the dog a fierce look. "Shoo! Go away, I have to get to class." Izuku gazed in awe around the classroom. Wow, he soon noticed 2 menacing figures interacting nearer the classroom's end. Iida yelled, "Get your feet off that desk now." Bakugo laughed and said, "Huh? Did someone shove a stick up your ass or were you just born with one?" Izuku let out an inward groan. "I was hoping that they might be in different classes, but I knew they would be here." "Where is Nanami?" "She said she would be here." He searched for his best friend. Tenya Iida approached him, and he concluded that she was not frightening but rather just stiff. "Hey, I recognize you. It's Falling Boy." When Izuku saw the pleasant girl from the entrance exam, he turned around and flushed. She started talking right away, approaching too closely in an overly friendly way as he struggled to recall the meaning of words. He didn't notice his phone vibrating in the middle of everything. Izuku wasn't answering, and Nanami was groaning as she stared at her phone while the dog below wouldn't go. The damned thing would not leave her, even after she threw a shoe at it. As she surveyed her surroundings, Nanami's eyes grew softer. Carefully balancing herself on the thick branch, she pulled up her legs and embraced her knees. "A hero who is afraid of dogs? What was I thinking? I will be late," she thought gravely. Someone asked, "What are you doing up there?" She noticed a familiar purple-haired head when she looked down. He turned to face the still barking dog and asked, "Are you a cat or something? Did you really get chased up a tree by a dog?" She sobbed pitifully, "It chased me from all the way home, okay? Just get it away, Shinso." The dog ceased barking and turned to look at Shinso. He glared at his land and waved it. The dog tipped its head, gave Nanami one last glance, and fled, saying, "Shoo, get out of here." From the back of her head, an irk mark appeared. She whispered to herself, "If that isn't the biggest load of bull." With a weary and slightly sarcastic smile, he said, "Do you need help getting down? Class will be starting soon, you know." Nanami complained angrily. She examined her hands, which were slightly bleeding and blistered, but she should be able to get down. "Yes, just a little," she said, moving to the tree's trunk. She didn't want the boy to look up, even with tights underneath her skirt, so she asked, "See, can you just not look up for a bit though?" Shinso rubbed his neck, blushed, and turned his head away. "Sure, whatever." He waited until she was low enough for him to look up, but he kept his gaze on the ground. She let out a grunt as her hands started to slip. He let out a sigh and then wrapped his hands around her waist, gently lowering her. He picked up her shoe and gave it to her as soon as her feet touched the floor. As she replaced her shoe, she complained, "Thanks so much. Everyone kept going past me, or taking pictures. I'm glad to see you got in. Are you in the hero course?" she inquired. Nothing specifically caused Shinso to frown. "No, I'm in general studies." Nanami half complained, "What? But that's not fair, your quirk is so useful. With a sigh, she checked her phone. Eek, I've got to go. She grinned as she turned to face him. She hurried away, leaving Shinso alone, saying, next time I see you, let me get your number sometime, okay? He started muttering, she's so exhausting. Nanami puffed out her cheeks in annoyance as soon as she saw Izuku. She approached him and pulled on his backpack, causing him to abruptly stop talking. He grinned as he turned back to face her. Nanami. He winced at the sulky look he got. He said, did I do something? You ignored my texts. I really needed you. Izuku blinked and glanced at his phone, which displayed 4 missed texts. Izukun HLP dog ch sing and Sholyard. It chased me up a tree. It stole my shoe. If I die in this tree, please plant a carnation bush at the base with a nice memorial. Also please give all of my good luck charms to the local cats. At the final one, Izuku furrowed his brows. He nodded, fighting the urge to laugh. He apologized, saying, sorry, Nanami. I wasn't paying attention to my phone. You got down though, so that was pretty lucky. Nanami stiffened and began to shudder. She grinned slightly and used both hands to touzle his mane. Don't say, lucky, you'll jinx me. I can't stay mad at you, you're much too cat-like. Iida hummed curiously, I take it you two know each other already? Such informality? When Nanami realized there were other people around, she started to pet his hair more, so Izuku leaned down a little to give her better access. She had developed the habit at some point. To be honest, he liked her petting his hair more than her pulling on his own, and it seemed to soothe her. Not to mention that it wasn't always unpleasant. As she talked to Iida, her shyness had returned. She paused and found herself frowning up at him before saying, he's my best friend. Did you ever apologize to him? Yes, of course. Gave Iida a rigid response. Oh, you mean about earlier? Yeah, he was pretty upfront about it. Izuku chuckled. He raised his head and grinned slightly. If you're here to make friends, then leave. A voice called out to them from behind, irritated and drowsy. The pupils looked in the direction of what they thought was a caterpillar man. It turned out to be nothing more than a sleeping bag. He complained as he sucked on what appeared to be an applesauce pouch after removing the bag. Everyone's minds were filled with the same thought. What is that thing? Nanami was going crazy as she pulled at her hair. She firmly closed her eyes and said, whoever does the worst will get expelled. My quirk isn't suited for this. She began to shake as the incident progressed. Katsuki grunted, Nana, what the fuck are you doing? When Nanami turned to look behind her, she saw the explosion boys staring at her with daggers. She waved her hands as though she were trying to mimic a shield. Emmy. Nothing, just trying to keep my composure, she said. Please ignore this humble stepping stone. I don't think I can handle you scaring me right now, Katsuki. She winced as Katsuki grabbed her hair and pulled it while glaring at her. He sneered, don't make fun of me, Freckles. He glanced at Aizawa, their instructor. He paused, smirked, and gestured to Deku, who was performing the long jump at the time, saying, that asshole is just trying to scare you. Like he's seriously going to expel someone on the first day. And if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be that quirkless loser over there. So you'll survive by default. Nanami kicked the back of his knee while frowning. She reprimanded, don't say things like that. She grunted and kicked him, forcing Katsuki to bend. Is that the gratitude I receive for attempting to lift her spirits? Angrily, he thought. The blonde with the attitude was about to blow him up when she said. She complained, Izukun has a quirk, you pompous jerk. I don't know how, but it manifested sometime before the exam. I don't know what it's like, but I bet it's great, she gasped. What? He inquired. She gave him a look. Izukun has a quirk good enough to get into class 1A, she said, glancing at her friend. Maybe his quirk is something he can only show off with a certain test. He yelled, what the hell? With his hands smoking menacingly near her hair, he leaned down and got in her face. If he had a quirk he would have gotten it when we were kids. But it's not medically impossible, you know, gripping the long strand of her hair between his thumb and index finger, he grinned. If I find out you're lying, Freckles, I'll burn a bald patch into your hair. With a shriek, Nanami stepped back and placed her hands on her hair. Don't do that, my hair is my most attractive feature, she screamed. Bakugo placed his hands on his hips and scoffed. You're serious then, Nana? He murmured. That nerd has a quirk now. But you've never seen it? How do you know that twerp isn't lying just to get your attention? He touched his forehead. Angrily, Nanami covered her head. Well, I guess we'll just find out then, won't we, Katsuki? She sighed. Aizawa called angrily, Yoshino. If you're done flirting, it's your turn. The two teenagers glared at one another and flushed. With a sigh, Nanami headed for the long jump. She took a few steps back after hesitating and surveying the area. With a quick leap onto her hands, she launched herself barely above the sand. The machine took a picture, and she heard it. She grinned to herself, happy with her leap. Not bad, she said. He folded his arms thoughtfully before giving her a grudging thumbs up. Does that count, Aizawa-sensei? He asked. Nanami let out a sigh of relief. She stumbled over nothing as she ran in Izuku's direction. She was about to stand up when a foot landed on her head. Eek! It pulled away instantly. Ah, it seems I'm always stepping on you, are you okay? Because she could hear Katsuki laughing and sense that her classmates were staring at her, Nanami chose not to look up. She waved her hand and let out a deep sigh into the sand. Why don't you just let me die in my shame for a bit? As before, someone grabbed her hand and pulled her off the ground. He lowered her until her feet touched the floor and said, Sorry, you're still lighter than you look. She let out a sigh, brushed herself off, and then gazed up at him in wonder. She put a hand to her chin and puckered her lips in thought, saying, It's you, Sho, I'm sorry, what's your name? We never introduced ourselves the first time you stepped on me. My apologies, I'm Todoroki Shoto. Do you need some ice for your head? He replied. She glanced at their hands and swiftly retracted her own. No, I'm good, she exclaimed. I keep finding myself clutching the hand of this handsome boy. She cleared her throat. Yoshino Nanami, she paused, examining his scar. She cleared her throat and said, would you She looked red in the face, trying to think of a polite way to inquire about his father. And never mind, she exclaimed as she hurried away, covering her face in shame as she went up to Izuku. He said, Are you okay, Nanami? Are you hurt? He touched her head, feeling for any bumps on where she was stepped on. I guess not. Nanami planted her forehead in his shoulder, panic clear in her voice. Arg, I'm so awkward. Izuku blushed and raised both arms as if to avoid touching her. Ah, you aren't the only one. Nanami hummed thoughtlessly as she did the seated toe touch, pushing the measuring stick all the way back. Wow, Yoshino-san, you're pretty flexible. Nanami looked to the side to see Jiro, who only managed to push the stick a little further past her toes. Were you a cheerleader or something? Nanami blushed, accidentally bending the stick. No. She sat up, giving the stick to an annoyed-looking Aizawa. Sorry, I bent it. Whatever, flexibility isn't a bad thing. He took the item from her and went to fetch another one. Nanami looked at the earphone jack girl, tilting her head. I'm not peppy enough to be a cheerleader, she admitted. But I learned gymnastics a couple of years ago and picked it back up so. That could be helpful in a fight, couldn't it? You could jump around and dodge. Jiro hummed. By the way, I don't think I've seen you use your quirk yet. Is it like that Midoriya guy's and you're just waiting for an opportunity? She asked, standing up and dusting herself off. No, she muttered. My quirk is not suited for these kinds of things. She looked at her with a small smile. But I think I'm doing better since the ball throwing section. She had poured as much of her bad luck into the ball and threw it as hard as she could. By the way, is that Todoroki guy bullying you? She pointed towards the bicolored-haired boy. I heard you say he's stepped on you before. That's pretty rude. You should tell a teacher. Nanami squeaked and waved her hands frantically. No, it's a misunderstanding. He didn't mean to. That was my quirk, she exclaimed in a panic. Besides, each time he apologized immediately. Your quirk made him step on you. She blushed when she heard it repeated to her. Tugging gently on her hair, she looked at her shoes. My quirk is misfortune, so if anything unlucky can happen to me it will. Oh, so it really wouldn't help in this situation. I suppose Aizawa-sensei might consider that. The raven-haired girl smiled a little. Well, if it helps you're pretty fit, so you should do fine. Nanami's cheeks burned at the compliment. Thanks. Jiro grinned mischievously. She leaned in and whispered to her. So if you don't mind me asking, are you and Midoriya a thing? She looked back at the freckled boy before returning to her. You're pretty affectionate towards him. Plus that was quite the display when you practically hugged him in front of everyone. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. No, of course not, she laughed. Izukun is my best friend. If anything he's more of a brother to me. That's all, really, she trailed off in thought. She looked back at Jiro and smiled softly. Besides, she looked over and saw him speaking to Uraraka. He seems to have his eyes on someone else. Jiro frowned a little. Well, that's disappointing. She sighed. Huh, why? Oh, nothing, don't worry about it. Nanami walked up to Izuku, taking his hand and inspecting his finger. I'm glad the tests are over, but your poor finger must be killing you, she mumbled. Ouch, you really did just recently get your quirk. Yeah, I'll have Recovery Girl take a look, he sighed. I just hope I don't get expelled. I want to learn how to use my quirk. Look alive. Here are your results. You're being rated from best to worse. There's no sense in going over it all individually. Nanami looked at the holographic graph, tugging on her head in terror as she kept looking down for her name. Whoever gets the lowest score will get expelled. Where am I? Where's my name? Then she spotted it. She was beneath Hagakure, and below her was Mineta. Her eyes trailed down and she gasped. She looked over to Midoriya. He was last. The green-haired boy looked on in horror. Nanami cautiously waved her hand in front of his face. She clenched her fists and stood up straight. Wait here, she muttered, moving forward. Midoriya grabbed her wrist. What? Nanami, what are you going to do? She looked back at him angrily. What are you talking about? I'm going to tell him to expel me instead. You deserve to be here more than I do. She pulled her wrist free and kept walking. Aizawa Shota. No, Eraserhead, you're my favorite hero, but Izukun is my favorite person. She steeled herself. She straightened her back, her strides wide and determined. Aizawa-sensei. By the way, no one is getting expelled. He called out. He smiled dryly. That was just a tactful deception to boost morale and make sure everyone would do their best. Nanami stopped, stumbling forward to catch herself, only for Katsuki to grab her arm and prevent her from falling. Nanami looked back at him, an irk mark popping from her head at the sight of him rolling his eyes. Yoshino, were you about to say something? Aizawa asked uninterestedly. Nanami flinched and stumbled backward, quickly hiding behind Katsuki. She placed her hand on his shoulder as she peeked out. Ahaha, I didn't say anything, Aizawa-sensei. She called out, whimpering. I almost got myself expelled for nothing, didn't I? Pathetic, Katsuki muttered. Nanami smiled when Aizawa passed Izuku a note to see Recovery Girl. She sighed quietly and rested her forehead onto Katsuki's back in relief. Thank goodness, she whispered to herself. Katsuki looked back at her in annoyance, before looking away and huffing. That damned nerd, something about this just isn't right, he thought angrily. He zoned in on Izuku, his eyes narrowing in fury, and I'm going to figure out what. Nanami gazed at the hair straighteners on exhibit, her lips puckering in struggle. Before her second day of school, she and her mother went shopping early in the morning. But the reason why didn't exactly make her happy. She turned to face her mother, who was examining perfumes a few feet away. Mom, is straight hair a more popular look for girls? Sakura gave her a sly smile as she turned to face her. Maybe, but I love your curly hair. Why? Trying to impress a boy at school? She said quietly. Deep blushing, Nanami burst out laughing too loudly. You're funny, haha. No, she said, stroking her hair. I thought maybe it'd be easier to make friends if I had straight hair like the other girls, she said quietly. Izukun might like it, but I can't say for sure. Sakura laughed quietly to herself. Remember, sweetness, we're buying a gift for your grandmother. If you really want one, I'll buy you a straightener next time. After tensing up, Nanami glanced down at her shoes. She whispered, does she have to stay in our home? Can't she just go to a hotel? She sprayed perfume on her wrist and sniffed it, saying, Nanami, I know your grandmother makes you nervous for some reason, but she loves you just as much as your father and I do. It's just for the weekend. This is nice. Nanami ruffled her curly hair and sighed. I'm going to go get a snack or something. Nanami left as soon as she could after her mother gave her a brief note of approval. She let out a sorrowful sigh, fighting back tears as her eyes stung. Wiping her eyes, she continued to move. Some nearby were startled when she let out a deep sigh and slapped her cheeks. She whispered to herself, I wonder if I can stay at a friend's house. She raised an eyebrow. She continued to walk while glaring straight ahead. My only friend is a boy, and I don't think I'm close enough with Jiro-chan, she said. Why must she always stay with us when she comes to visit? She thought sharply. As she started to transform into her hero costume, Nanami felt self-conscious. The design team was free to choose what she wore because her specifications were very straightforward. She literally only asked that it be simple to move in. However, the design they chose. So embarrassing, she growled. Jiro laughed and pushed her. She gave the girl a back pat and said, consider this, aside from her boots and gloves, Hagakure is completely nude. Then they heard Hagakure chirp, "It's fine since you can't see me though." With a sigh, Nanami put it on. Yeah, but still. She wore a plain hero costume. Her chest, which was unimpressive compared to some of her classmates, appeared to be accentuated by a black crop top with hot pink stripes underneath. She had a utility belt around her waist and was wearing black shorts. She was wearing gloves with pink fluffs on the rims and matching black ankle boots. A slingshot with a pouch dangling off the side was fastened to her belt. As she studied the ensemble, Tsuyu put a finger to her chin and remarked, "It doesn't look so bad, Nanami-chan. It's kind of like Kyoka-chan's, you could wear it anywhere, ribbit." But I feel so exposed, Su-chan," she said, pulling her shirt over her head. And you can see my navel, and my legs are all out there," she said, covering her face in shame. Why are there these weird stripes under my chest? It's just so indecent." The only thing that most of the girls could think of was, "So modest." Yaoyorozu gave her a shoulder pat and laughed. "I think modesty is a good trait to have, Yoshino-san." Nanami turned away from her hero costume, blushing as she did so. She whispered, "To be honest, I feel a little better now." Nanami followed Jiro as she moved among her classmates who had undergone a transformation. The costumes came in a wide variety. She discovered that some, like Mineta and Todoroki, were inconsistent. However, they all appeared to represent the wearers individually for the most part. Comforted by the slightly taller girl's presence, she gently pulled on Jiro's jacket. Nanami blushed and looked down shyly as Jiro laughed a little. She teased, "Are you afraid someone in the class won't like your outfit?" She rolled over and gave the little girl a playful prod on the cheek. When Nanami didn't respond, she arched an eyebrow. "It's amazing how you can stand up to that hothead Bakugo, but the idea of being in a crowd scares you." "I dunno, Katsuki is scary, I'm usually scared out of my mind when I talk to him," she acknowledged. She exclaimed, "Katsuki, huh? You're on a first-name basis with him too." The blonde's blank stare made her perspire. "Are you actually friends with that guy?" she asked. She grinned as she glanced over her shoulder. She pointed in the direction the boy had come from and said, "Well anyway, there's Midoriya. Why don't you go show him your costume? I'm sure he'll like it." Nanami turned to see Izuku standing there. The costume made her eyes soften. In all honesty, she found it adorable, and the mask effectively highlighted his large, round eyes. She bit her lip and glanced down at her costume. She glanced at Jiro, who nudged her comfortingly. She inhaled deeply before approaching him. Izuku, I like your costume," she exclaimed, pulling her hair while her cheeks blushed slightly. "It makes you seem approachable." Izuku glanced at Nanami's attire and grinned a little. He looked away, blushing slightly. "Yours looks," he commented uneasily. At his response, Nanami winced. She lowered her head and clasped her hands together. "It's not really my style, but I wasn't specific in what I wanted. I just asked for something that would promote mobility," she acknowledged. She had no idea why her chest felt constricted. He pointed curiously to the belt and said, "When you put it that way, it's pretty practical." "What's in the belt?" She moved her hands to cover her navel and said, It's medical staff. Just the basic first aid. I just wish they added a little more. Man, I know the feeling. I ended up with this weird skin-tight costume." The sound of Uraraka's voice made Nanami stiffen. She saw Izuku cover his mouth and blush profusely through his costume. Pulling at her hair, she walked meekly back towards Jiro, leaving the conversation behind. Again, she couldn't figure out why she felt the need to cry. Jiro scowled at the young girl's sudden decline in attitude. Before turning back to the girl, she took a quick look at the two friends. She whispered to herself, "Now I feel like an ass." She gave Nanami a head pat and then grinned a little. "Hey, it's okay. Don't think too much about it." Nanami strolled silently next to Katsuki. They were acting as the villains in the small task that All Might had given them. She looked anxiously at her partner. As she accompanied him up the stairs, she questioned, "Katsuki, should I really be the one guarding weapon? I get that you want to fight, but what if they get past you?" Katsuki gave her a fierce look. "What, are you trying to say you don't think I can beat that shitty Deku?" He barked. He paused in the middle of his statement and clicked his teeth. "Well, I can, and I will. That's why you're guarding the damn thing. You don't have to do anything but stand there and look. I won't accept a loss, Freckles. So just shut up and do what I say." Nanami nodded and winced. With a sigh, she pulled at her hair. Gazing up at the fictitious weapon, she approached the final set of stairs. Gazing at Katsuki, she approached it and rubbed the back of her neck. "So I'll just guard it. I'll leave the rest to you," he complained and went down the stairs, saying, "Damn right you will." "All right, boys and girls." All Might's voice rang in her ears. "Begin." Nanami closed her eyes and lowered herself to the ground, pressing her ear to the ground. Despite not having her father's hearing ailment, she discovered that she could hear a little better than the typical person if she focused. But not to the degree that she could refer to it as a quirk. "Oh, it sounds like one of them has already gotten past him." Given that Katsuki doesn't seem to be willing to let Izukun go, it's likely Uraraka. Her heart started to race with fear. How can I compete with Uraraka's ability to make things float? The objects in the room that the zero-gravity wielder could use against her caught her attention. Quickly thinking on her feet, she picked up the objects and threw them out the window. Of course, not before making sure there was nobody below. She considered waiting by the weapon or by the door as she glanced around. She debated for a while before deciding to wait by the weapon. Okay, the objective is to apprehend Uraraka. Her hands twitched. What if she wandered around the room, leaving traces of her misfortune on every pillar that the girl with the pink cheeks might conceal herself behind? She waited by the weapon once more after she was satisfied. That ought to take care of it. I only used a small amount because I didn't want her to suffer any harm. Pulling something out of her pouch, she hummed as she picked up her slingshot. The object was a small rubber ball. As she poured her bad luck into the ball, she glanced at the weapon. She clenched her fists. Izukun seems to really like her. Perhaps I shouldn't interfere with them. Besides, I suppose this kind of thing wouldn't work for me. I say that, but it breaks my heart to think of letting him go. She sighed. She asked herself, is this what having a crush is like? What? Screamed Uraraka's voice. Nanami's face reddened intensely. God, did you hear that last part aloud? Reaching for her slingshot, she inserted the rubber ball into it. She drew back and aimed, listening for Uraraka once more. She awaited a move from the Infinity Girl. Without any provocation, one pillar broke. The ball bounced off the wall and struck Uraraka in the thigh after Nanami's eyes widened and she fired the shot, passing the pillar. She heard, ouch. Nanami hurried in. I found you. Before leaping forward with her hand extended, prepared to make the girl float, Uraraka leapt from her hiding spot. In order to throw her to the ground, Nanami pushed one arm aside, grabbed the other, and swung her wide. The brunette kicked at her legs, knocking her over just as she was ready to grab her and hold her. Nanami felt herself floating in midair and let out a startled squeak. As she watched Uraraka dash for the weapon, she started to panic. No, no, no. I need to take action. Reaching for her slingshot, she pointed it at the girl's feet. She fired several bouncy balls laced with misfortune, and she winced when she saw her classmate trip over them. Looking around, she slammed her feet onto a pillar and pushed herself off, charging at Uraraka, who had just forced herself to float in the direction of the weapon. With a swift, sorry, she raised her leg and slammed her foot down onto her opponent's shoulder, using an axe kick to force the airborne girl to the ground. The brunette's quirk was cancelled, and Nanami screamed as she was abruptly thrown to the ground. Uraraka moaned and slowly stood up. Ow, I'm gonna feel that for a while. With tape out to restrain her, Nanami ran in her direction. Uraraka, ready. Uraraka ran to a pillar, and Nanami heard Izuku's voice in the distance. Wait, what? Smash. The floor beneath them abruptly rose. Uraraka used her quirk on the pillar and held it up. Sorry, Yoshino-chan. Improvised special move, Comet Home Run. Uraraka swung the pillar as if it were an enormous bat, and the debris flew through the air and directly at her. As Uraraka flew over her and landed on the weapon, Nanami braced herself and was scratched by the debris. Nanami's gaze expanded. No, I didn't succeed. With a heavy sigh, she collapsed to the floor. As Recovery Girl wrapped her in bandages and gave her a lollipop at the end, Nanami sighed. Desperately, she pulled at her hair. She turned to face Izuku, who was healing his arms next to her. She reprimanded the young man, saying, There you go, dearie. You should be more careful. She appeared irritated. He said, Man, that was insane, as they walked out of the infirmary. Nanami gave him a melancholy smile. He gave her a smile. Nanami blushed and turned her head away. You did great, Nanami. Uraraka told me how she was close to losing. She scowled and punched his arm as she looked at it. Ow! Why did you do that? She yelled. Why did you do that? You messed up your arms over Katsuki. I get that you guys have this long-standing, whatever this is. But it's not worth doing that to yourself. She turned toward him. She sobbed angrily. What were you thinking? Exploding the entire building. Your arm was broken badly. You need to get that quirk of yours under control. Don't destroy your body just to prove a point. Izuku winced. I know. Don't cry, Nanami, I'm sorry. I'll see you later, Izuku. With anxiety, he inquired, where are you going? To yell at Katsuki. She hurried away while painfully pulling at her hair. I never imagined that I would become angry with Izuku, but I did yell at him. As Katsuki escorted Nanami to her home, she was perplexed. Katsuki and Nanami got into a heated argument over Katsuki's lack of self-control and Nanami's excessive hostility toward Izuku. He walked her home, but neither of them was entirely sure how it ended. Nanami followed him, walking on the inside of the pavement. For some reason, he would grab her arm and drag her away from the road each time she approached it, putting her on the other side of him. He held her wrist tightly after the third time. To be honest, it felt like a strict parent guiding a child. Unable to bear the silence any longer, she muttered, I'm sorry about the test earlier. As she confessed, her heart tightened. I tried to stop Uraraka, but she and Izuku are a really good pair. With his teeth clenched, Katsuki turned to face her. When she didn't answer, he glared and narrowed his eyes, saying, we'll just have to kill them next time then. Then, he insisted, say it. We'll fucking win next time. She squeaked, do I have to curse? With a frown, Katsuki squeezed her wrist. Oh okay, we'll win next time. He nodded to her with a grunt of satisfaction. Katsuki, you're hurting my wrist. He lowered his hand to take hers and said, God, why are you so damn whiny? He growled, how's this? Is that fucking better? Nanami turned red and turned her head away. If you stopped trying to get near the road I wouldn't have to fucking do this. As they walked, Nanami glanced down at her shoes. She looked at their hands as they walked, thinking, I've never held hands with a boy before. She thought wearily, I don't know if I like it or not, but I feel like he'll yell at me if I let go. It's embarrassing. She was startled out of her reverie when her phone pinged. She sighed as she looked at Katsuki, who did not try to release her hand. Uncomfortably, she reached into the opposite side pocket of her skirt with her free hand and took out her phone. Her mother gave it to her. Nanami, your grandmother is here a couple of days early, isn't that great? Will you be home soon? As Nanami read it, she stiffened. She gave Katsuki's hand a light squeeze. He looked at her, his scowl growing as she came to a halt. What the hell are you doing? We're almost at your damned house. He yelled. When she didn't answer, he arched an eyebrow. Did someone die? He asked warily. No, she whispered. She tugged at her hair more forcefully than usual as she glanced at him. Weakly, she murmured, Katsuki, can I stay at your place for a few days? I don't want to go home. What the fuck? No. Why the hell would you want to stay at my house? I already fucking told you, we aren't friends. Nanami laughed shakily and nodded. Right, I was just joking, she said, nuzzling her neck. She sighed as she glanced at her phone and said, very funny, huh? Ha. She put it away without bothering to answer. Excellent. She had to arrive early, so I was hoping to spend the weekend hiding out. Bitterly, she thought. Her eyes narrowed as she saw her house approaching from around the corner. Katsuki looked at the house with a frown. He paused and drew her near to him. I don't care or anything, but are you being abused or some shit like that? He said quietly. Nanami looked away, biting her lip. In an attempt to keep his composure and avoid drawing attention to himself, Katsuki clenched his teeth. He inquired, did they hit you? Nanami gave a headshake. It's not like that. They don't abuse me. I don't feel comfortable when my grandmother comes to visit, she acknowledged. She gave him a modest smile as she looked up. I'm sorry to have worried you, I can go by myself now. With a flush, Katsuki stepped back a few hard steps and instantly released her hand. To emphasize his point, his hands exploded with tiny explosions. Don't get it twisted, Freckles. I wasn't worried, you were just pissing me off with that weird-ass face you were making, got it? He said. As she looked toward her home, he saw that she was not afraid of him. Her eyes didn't appear to be as bright as they usually were. He complained, give me your phone. Nanami turned to look at him and asked, what? He yelled. Did I fucking stutter? Give me your damn phone. And grabbed the phone as soon as she held it. After pressing a few buttons and muttering something about antiquated technology, he returned it. There, now you have my number. Nanami glanced at the new contact on her list and blinked. What for? As Katsuki heard her question, a vein in his head began to throb. He tried to control the heat that was rising in his face while his ears warmed up. Because I decided to fucking give it to you. Don't use it for stupid shit, you got that, Nana? He said. At the sudden outburst, Nanami blinked. She nodded reluctantly and bowed slightly. She sighed as he turned around and walked away without saying goodbye. Thanks, she asked. Nanami was amused by the contact name he had entered when she glanced at her screen. She chuckled a little and swiftly changed the name to something more appropriate, King Explosion Murder. As she continued to walk, her house grew larger until she reached the front step, and she sighed. She was immediately welcomed by Hajime. Nanami, there you are. You're all scratched up. Is that from school or did you get chased by a dog again? He was worried. As she entered, he gave her a head pat. As she got out of her shoes, she gave a straightforward response. School. All Might had us fight against each other as a villain-hero simulation. She grimaced as she looked at the wooden slippers in the corner. Getting lessons from the #1 hero. My, how impressive you've become. Nanami stiffened. The voice of the one person she feared made her blood run cold. As her grandmother entered, she swallowed. She looked her in the eye, her eyes straining to stay off the floor. With some graying in her blonde hair, the woman appeared to be in her late 50s. She came into the room wearing a simple purple kimono. Nanami put her hands neatly in front of her and bowed deeply, fighting the impulse to pull her hair. Hello grandmother. She looked up into her grandmother's icy blue eyes through her asymmetrical bangs. The old woman grinned, but it didn't appear to reach her eyes. She approached her and watched as her granddaughter slowly stood up to look at her. Well, I see your manners have improved. Though, you've hardly grown since I've last seen you. I came to celebrate your getting into UA, lucky. Nanami gazed at the dish before her. She looked at Mashiro, her grandmother, who was seated at the lunch table across from her. It was the third day of her stay. Her eyes narrowed as she said, Lucky, are you not going to eat your breakfast? I worked hard to make it. Unwillingly, Nanami picked up her fork and began eating. Probably adding a laxative or something. Grandmother looked at the woman and scowled as her glare grew colder. Nanami hastily shoved her food down and forced herself to swallow, fighting off her gag reflex. She was momentarily emotionless. Then she suddenly got to her feet. May I be excused? Sakura gave a startled jump. She said, Oh, of course, as her daughter hurried upstairs. She chuckled as she glanced at her plate. Mother, Nanami doesn't like mushrooms. They upset her tummy. Mashiro put her hand to her mouth in surprise. Oh dear, I didn't know. I'll be more careful next time. Change POV. Nanami threw up the lunch that was given to her and coughed. She observed the bubble of foam in the toilet. She hurried to the sink to rinse her mouth after coughing a little harder. She muttered to herself, soap? Is she trying to kill me now? After cleaning her teeth, she went to her room and took her wallet. She gave the fluffy creature a pat while glancing at Mio, who was enjoying the sun after giving the mirror one final look. She frowned and wiped her mouth once more before heading downstairs. She glanced into the dining area. Can I go to the mall? Sakura gave her a quick glance and gave her a nod. As she made her way to the door, she called, Sure. Don't spend recklessly now. Lucky, have fun, her grandmother called. Nanami walked out of the house without answering. In an attempt to relax, Nanami angrily yanked her hair. She was in need of actual food. She contemplated what to eat while gazing up at the sky. She sighed and rubbed her now raw throat. Soba, she chose when she noticed a famous store. She stood in front of the store, trying to think of something to do about her grandmother. Not caring how long she had been standing there, she thought, perhaps Izukun will let me stay with him. From behind her, an aggressive voice yelled, Hey, Brad, are you going in or not? Nanami turned around and gave them a glare. She tensed when she saw the bigger, older high schooler in front of her. Just go around me, she said. Oh boy, she began to mutter. As he zoomed in on her, the brute snarled, Hey, I know you. You're that girl that got muddy water dumped all over my brother, Yoshino. When she attempted to move away from him, he took hold of her arm. Nah, we gotta have a little talk. Nanami whimpered as she attempted to take his arm off of him. She gave him a feeble glare. Look, Kashino-senpai, I'm sure your brother wouldn't want you fighting his battles for him. So why don't you just let me go, and we go our separate ways, huh? With a sneer, older Kashino started pulling her away. As she frantically looked around, Nanami felt her heartbeat quicken. Either no one had observed the exchange or no one was concerned enough to offer assistance. She closed her eyes and bit her lower lip. I will not depend on civilians. I want to be a hero. She placed her other hand on his wrist and started to pour her misfortune into him while glaring up at the back of his head. She waited while glaring at her captor. A flower pot fell in front of him after maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Nanami used the opportunity to kick the back of Kashino's knee as he abruptly stepped back. She yanked her hand out of his as he leaned back and relaxed his hold. You little runt, he gasped as he spun around to attack her. Shouting and leaping back, Nanami fled, plunging into the soba restaurant where the altercation began. She struck a solid body right away. She grunted and held her nose, then looked up to see a familiar face. Yoshino. Nanami's gaze expanded. Todoroki-kun. Hi. Her eyes widened as she turned to face the back. She sprinted past him, swerving and ducking around people before running into the women's restroom, saying, "Excuse me." Kashino barged in with a growl. He demanded, "Where is that little freak?" She had just stepped inside when he saw her and snarled and pounded on the door. "Get the hell out here, you coward. I know that flower pot almost falling on me was your fault." In the hopes that he would give up and leave, Nanami covered her mouth and tried not to speak. "Oh no, what should I do? I need to call my dad, but I left my phone at home." Change POV. Watching the stranger rap on the woman's door, Todoroki frowned. He appeared unconcerned with the spectacle he was creating. With a sigh, he approached him and placed his hand on the brute's shoulder. He pivoted. He screamed, "What the fuck do you want?" as his shoulder went cold. He tightened his grip and heated the ice until it melted, saying, "Get out now before I freeze the rest of you until the police come. Don't let me catch you harassing her again." The brute gazed at Todoroki, his eyes widening. He glared and slapped his hand off. As he stalked out of the restaurant, he growled, This isn't over." With a sigh, Todoroki gently knocked on the door. As the shy girl peered out the door, he took a step back and said, "Yoshino? He's gone now. You can come out now." She looked around and noticed that she was being stared at by a number of worried onlookers. After hesitating, she emerged with her head down. "Does that guy bother you often?" As she rubbed her sleeve against her eyes and wiped away the tears before they fell, Nanami shook her head and kept her head down. She sighed deeply and tugged at her hair. "His brother used to bully me in middle school. I haven't seen either of them in a couple of months, so I didn't know what to do when I saw him," she said. "Thank you for helping me." Observing her tug on her hair, Todoroki scowled. It didn't appear to be a good habit. He gestured to a table and said, "Do you want me to buy you some soba? You can sit with me for a while, in case that guy comes back." Nanami glanced back at the door before nodding and letting out a quiet sigh. "Okay." Change POV. With a sigh of satisfaction at the mild taste, Nanami slurped her soba. She looked up from her basket and tensed at the intense look the boy was giving her. "Thanks, Todoroki-kun," she said. What? Silently, "Are you okay?" he inquired. He looked at a noodle and said, "Your face is paler than normal. Your face kind of reminds me of the noodles." Nanami's gaze wavered. "What?" he tried again after realizing that his words weren't particularly flattering. That's not quite right. I mean, are you sick?" She paused, recalling her grandmother's actions from an hour before. She turned her head away from him and said, "I just have an upset stomach. What about you? You're incredibly angsty for a boy your age," she acknowledged. She paused, biting into her soba as she thought about what to say. "The first time I met you I couldn't help but worry about you. I half-hearted. I'll tell you my story if you tell me yours," was her offer. She didn't think the cold, attractive boy would concur. "I know we aren't friends but..." The boy repeated, "You've been worried since you met me?" Nanami gave a sheepish smile. She glanced awkwardly at her companion and said, "Yeah, sorry if that's weird. It's just that, when I met you and your dad, the look in your eyes, both of you, it made me wonder if you were safe with him," she said, shielding her left eye. "Especially when I look at that, is he responsible for that scar on your eye?" She stopped and thought. "You aren't obligated to tell me, of course, if it's a painful memory." Uncertain of how to interpret the girl's observance, Todoroki gazed at her indifferently. Under his intense stare, Nanami writhed and continued eating her noodles, clumsily dipping them into soy sauce. The teenagers appeared to be considering their options, and the silence between them was surprisingly relaxed. Todoroki sighed, "Fine." Mid-slurp, Nanami paused to give him a perplexed look. She finished her mouthful and said, "Huh? Will it be fine if I don't tell you the whole thing?" Sweating, Nanami put down her chopsticks. "I won't force you to say more than you're comfortable with. We haven't known each other long after all." As he finished his meal, Todoroki put down his chopsticks. "Is it fine if we go somewhere more private?" After he paid the bill, Nanami nodded and stood up. He glanced around as they got out, looking for what she thought was Kashino's brother. He took hold of her hand and guided her through the crowd after a brief moment of confirmation. As they walked, he remained silent. As they walked, Nanami gazed at his powerful back while attempting to regulate her heart rate. "How come I always end up holding his hand? I suppose he is aware that my peculiarity might make me stand out in this crowd." As the crowd grew denser, she yelled as she was pulled toward him. His hold tightened, causing her cheeks to flush pink. She was dragged into an alley by him. As he walked, he whispered, "This is a shortcut, but it might be kind of tight for you." She staggered a little over some litter and said, Wait, where are we going?" "It's not far from here. It's somewhere quiet that I like to go to when I want to get away from my stupid old man." Before long, they had entered a forested area. Once they were well into the woods, Todoroki released her hand. Nanami surveyed the area with interest. The size of the trees astounded her. Despite having seen the woods numerous times, she had never considered wandering inside out of concern that her peculiarity would lead to her getting lost or hurt. Rubbing the back of his neck, he complained, "I'll tell you the minimum of my story, all right?" Nanami sat down on the grass and nodded, saying, "And in return, you'll tell me yours." Nanami sat next to him, sweeping beneath her skirt. He glanced at his left hand and said, "My father trained me as a tool ever since I could remember, hoping I would one day topple All Might. My mother was very kind to me at first, but she couldn't handle the abuse he threw at her and me. If I tried to remember her, I could only recall her crying. My father would train me, regardless if I got sick or badly injured myself. He would hit my mother if she tried to stop him." Nanami scowled as she started pulling at her hair, worried about her classmate. She didn't move abruptly except for that. No noise that would deter the boy from going on. "My mother was driven mad, and he refused to say anything more, covering his left eye. He frowned as he turned back to face her. "I'll reject that old man. For as long as my body allows it, I won't use my left side. I'll show him that I can be the best without his power." He raised his eyebrows to reassure himself. "It's your turn." Nanami looked at her lap and winced. "I guess I was right to think Endeavor was a scumbag, even though I only partially understand what he told me. I hope you will tell me more in the future." She let out a sigh and twiddled the hem of her sleeve, contemplating the best way to tell the boy her story. Todoroki scowled as he sagged to see her face. "I know I said you have to tell me if I told you, but if it's painful then." "I'm the reason my mom is in a wheelchair," she muttered. At this, Todoroki sat up straight. Her chest tightened at the memory, and beads of sweat trickled down her neck. "When my quirk first manifested, I had no control and bad luck would spread to those around me, even if I didn't want it to. There was an accident, we were just coming from the store and, well, by the end of it, my mom couldn't walk anymore." Todoroki's lips were pursed. He paused, trying to think of the right words, and opened them slightly. He asked bluntly, "Does she hurt you?" Nanami gave a pitiful smile. Her eyes softened as she turned to face him. "No, if anything, she spoils me more now. She's always saying, 'I'm just glad it was me, and not you.' She refuses to blame me, but I know it's my fault." Her eyes darkened as she clenched her fists, saying, "It's my grandmother that's the issue, she despises me. She used to be so kind, but after the accident, she would berate me whenever we were alone. She'd do little things that my parents wouldn't notice. She would yank my hair if I did something wrong, and she would hit me if I talked back, but only when my parents weren't around. The last time she visited, she chopped off my hair. I'm not quite sure how, but she convinced my parents that I wanted to try something new, even though I was growing it out." She placed her hand on her throat, her grin falling. "Just an hour ago, she put soap in my food, all under the guise of making lunch for my family out of the kindness of her heart." Todoroki frowned. He questioned angrily, "And she does this all the time?" She grinned sheepishly and said, "No, only on visits. She doesn't live with us, thankfully." She looked down and furrowed her brows, saying, "I'm positive she fully blames me for my mother's accident." She laughed nervously and her eyes widened. "I hate her, and what she does, but since my parents don't resent me, I feel like I'm just getting what I deserve," she said. "God, I'm sorry, I ended up telling you way more than I intended." He scowled and then shook his head. "It's fine. Yoshino, how long will she be staying with you?" Thinking, Nanami rubbed the back of her neck. She should only be here a few more days. She never stays longer than a week. Todoroki scowled as he surveyed the trees that surrounded them. Do you get lost often because of your quirk? He inquired. Instead of responding, Nanami paused and puffed out her cheek. Do you want me to bring you here sometimes when your grandmother visits? He got up, picked up a stone, and threw it in a random direction. I come here to escape and just be by myself. That way, that damned old man of mine can't bother me. If your grandmother visits you, and you don't feel safe, you can come here or something. He extended his hand to her, saying, this place is quiet, the trees are thick, so people don't really come out here, it's a good place. Nanami gave a small smile. Taking his hand, she was lifted up without being lifted off the ground for the first time. She said softly, yeah, I'd appreciate it. Hey I won't tell anyone what you told me, so, can you keep this a secret? Especially from Izukun, I'm worried he might try to get involved. After a sidelong glance, Todoroki scratched the side of his head. He glanced at their hands and said, I guess. It's not my story to tell. Think you can follow me? Or do you need me to hold your hand still? Nanami grinned and shook her head. I should be fine, it's about time I got home, I only really went out to eat. She brushed off her skirt and trailed after him to the woods' edge. In an effort to avoid disturbing him, she took note of any distinctive features and tried to swiftly recall how to get here. She pointed out the holes in the trees and the specific flowers that were scattered across the grass. She noticed the faded graffiti on the walls as they entered the alley. They arrived at the open sidewalk, where Nanami kept an eye on her classmate's distinctive hair while observing the buildings to prevent getting lost. In the growing crowd, she had to pick up her pace to stay with him. However, it didn't take long for it to become excessive. Todoroki, help, I'm being swept away. When the slightly older teen turned around, he was shocked to see that the crowd was actually carrying the small girl away. With a sigh, he walked through the crowds and took her hand. He dragged her along, keeping his eyes away from her so she wouldn't notice the faintly amused sparkle in his eye. Nanami checked her phone's contacts, where Todoroki's number had just been added. She narrowed her eyes in recognition. I should ask for Jiro-chan's number, for some reason. I only have numbers from boys, if someone saw that they might think lowly of me, she murmured to herself. She frowned as she remembered the information that had been provided to her and thought of the dual-quirked boy. Despite her intense desire to learn more, she refrained from pushing her limits for fear of upsetting him. She wanted to help him so badly, but she didn't know how she would go about doing it. She just wanted to be friends with the poor teenager for the time being, and maybe she would become someone he could talk to honestly. Nanami listened to her home for any commotions. Everyone was asleep, even her grandmother, she hoped. Nanami moved as stealthily as she could through the hallways and toward the guest room. Since her father was working a late shift, this was the ideal moment for her to complete her task. In front of her grandmother's room, she stood. She grasped the doorknob and started to pour her bad luck into it. She thought, just a little. If I put too much, she'll know it was me. After a few seconds, she came to a halt and crept back into her room. She closed her eyes and lay down in her bed. I'm hoping that she will experience some inconvenience in the morning. As she heard her parents desperately attempting to open Mishiro's room's jammed door, Nanami hummed in her room with a wry smile. As the days passed, she had been slowly adding more misfortune to the door. The old crone's visit was almost a week in. She got a text while she was randomly browsing memes. Kachan appeared on the screen. Opening the message, Nanami wrinkled her nose. Come to my house, Freckles. Nanami let out a deep sigh. Her first reaction was, if this is another shitty Deku tirade, I'm not going. When did you get so ballsy? At the hothead's reply, Nanami laughed. Since I started being friends with you. He threatened to use multiple explosion emojis after saying, I already told you we aren't friends. If you aren't coming to my house, I'll come to yours, instead. When Nanami heard her father attempting to force the door open, she squinted. She replied right away that she would be there while giggling. She stood up and hurriedly put on her clothes, brushing her hair once. When she saw her father physically hanging off the door, she walked out into the hall and tried not to laugh. She called, trying not to sound amused. Hey, can I take some snacks to Katsuki's house? To see her, Hajime cocked his head back. Sure, just don't stay too late. Nanami gave a nod. After grabbing some cookies she and her mother had made earlier, she headed to the kitchen and left. Mitsuki greeted Nanami with an almost bone-crushing embrace, which made her wince. Nanami-chan, it's good to see you, she crooned. Nanami tapped out and gave the woman a back pat while grunting. Oni-san. Katsuki yelled, tearing them apart. Let her go, you hag, she can't fucking breathe. Then. Why are you always so fucking weird when she's here? Watch your damn mouth, Katsuki. I just want to have a good relationship with your girlfriend, otherwise I might not get to see my grandchildren. How many times do I have to say she isn't my fucking girlfriend? Nanami sighed and flushed deeply. Even though she had grown accustomed to Mitsuki's excitement, it was still embarrassing. With a sigh, she cleared her throat and held up the small bag of cookies. She caught the attention of the two angry blondes. With hesitation, she said, I brought these cookies to share, my mom and I made them earlier. When Mitsuki saw them, she enthusiastically clapped her hands. How cute, are those bunnies? I'll prepare some tea to go with them. Taking the bags from her, Katsuki scowled at the cookies. Why the fuck are they shaped so weirdly? Nanami gave a shrug. My grandmother insisted they be bunny-shaped. Personally I wanted them to be cat-shaped, but whatever, bitterly explains. Before rolling his eyes and dragging her to his room, he arched an eyebrow. I got a new game, but it's fucking boring if there's no one for me to kill. And the fucking NPCs are even worse, he grumbled. As she went up the stairs, she cocked her head. Does he simply want someone to oppose him? She staggered a little. What about your friends from middle school? Couldn't you play with them? She inquired. He opened the door to his room and drew her in, saying, fuck no, they're terrible at video games. I thought you couldn't be much worse. He snatched up a controller and hurled it in her direction. He approached her and pulled her long fringe of hair. And if you lose, he said. I'm cutting this. It looks fucking stupid. Nanami glared at the gadget he threw at her while puffing out her cheek. Deal. But if I win, I get to style your hair any way I want and you have to wear it to school tomorrow for the whole day. I think your hair might be long enough for pigtails, she replied. Katsuki's lips were pursed. She waved the remote mockingly while smiling. If you don't think you can win, I can think of something else, she said. Katsuki laughed. As if, the first to win 6 rounds out of 10 is the winner. Let's fucking go. I hope you enjoy your haircut. Nanami sat down next to the boy and laughed. She opened the bag and gave some of the cookies to the irritable boy, saying, fine, but can we eat some of the cookies first? As he ate some cookies, he complained, don't stall your defeat doe eyes. The new nickname made Nanami blink, but she didn't find it as offensive as being called Freckles. He picked up his controller and munched on the cookies without doing anything that would give her a clue as to whether he liked them or not. After giving her a quick shake, Nanami started playing the fighting game with him. Aside from the conversation of the characters they were portraying, there was a relaxed quiet. When Nanami realized she didn't understand the button combinations, she frowned. When Bakugo first used a power move, much to his opponent's chagrin, he grinned. He frowned at the simple combo she gave him after glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. Hey, Nana, he complained. She responded with a grunt, then let out a moan as she lost. His question was, is someone messing with you? Nanami stiffened and turned to face him again. He started the next round by saying, I've noticed that you hold your head down more than usual these past few days. I don't care or anything, but it's fucking annoying to see you constantly looking like a beat-up dog. Playing again, Nanami smiled softly as she went along. Ah, Katsuki after Todoroki. I suppose I'm more obvious than I anticipated. She pondered, somewhat amused. Yeah, someone is messing with me, but they won't be around much longer. With a grunt, Katsuki pushed her with his elbow. If you need me to kick their ass, just let me know. He sighed. He was distracted when Nanami rolled her eyes and used a powerful combination. What the fuck, what was that? She chuckled, and the sound caused his shoulders to loosen up. Nanami took a brush and comb out of Sakura's drawer and smiled. She was allowed to browse her selection of accessories and goods while her mother painted for a commission in her art studio, which was actually just the garage. Sakura didn't mind as long as she gave them back. Lucky, an angry voice snarled. As her grandmother walked in, Nanami stiffened. Empty hands, don't threaten her. She closed her eyes, let out a soft exhale, and set the brush and comb down slowly. She said softly, yes, grandmother. That fiasco with the door the last few days was you, wasn't it? You have a lot of nerve. The accusation from her grandmother made her perspire. As Mashiro stood behind her, she gasped, I promise you, grandmother, I have no idea what you're talking about. This house is old. Doors get stuck all the time, she replied, attempting to control her uneasiness. Mashiro took hold of Nanami's chin and made her turn to face him. She threw her back and watched icily as the girl staggered forward, saying, you insolent child. Do you take me for a fool? You may be able to fool your parents with this sweet girl act, but not me. You need to learn a thing or two about respect. Nanami's fist clenched. Yes, grandmother. Mashiro focused on the hand of her granddaughter. She yelled, "Are you threatening me?" Nanami gazed at her fist, her eyes widening. With haste, she unballed it and extended her hand in submission. "And no, grandmother, it's a misunderstanding. I didn't mean for you to feel threatened." The force of the slap caused her head to turn to the side. "Learn your place, Nanami. I'll be taking my leave before you get home from school. Next time I see you, I expect your behavior to have improved." Mashiro barked with rage. "And since you're going to UA, I expect that your quirk will be under control. Do I make myself clear?" As her grandmother walked out of the room, Nanami touched her cheek without saying anything. As she went to the bathroom to tend to the wound, her eyes darkened. Desperate to keep her strangeness under control, she chanted to herself, "I made it. I survived again. It's okay. Lock it up, don't let it spread." As Nanami entered the largely deserted classroom, she hummed. She noticed Katsuki sitting in his seat, obviously annoyed, and smiled. She held up a brush, comb, and dark green ribbon, and he felt an irk mark appear. With excitement, she asked, "Ready?" With excitement, she examined the ribbon. "Izukun's color is green." She laughed, just a little secret revenge. She thought it would be hilarious to apply it to her hot-headed friend's hair because the color matched that of her crush's hair. He got up and yelled, "What the fuck is that ribbon for?" Nanami approached him with an excited smile. "Ah, you agreed to the conditions. No complaints. You were going to cut my hair, it's only fair." Katsuki gave the ribbon a threatening glare. He smirked and made little explosions in his hand, saying, "HMPH, I liked it better when you were fucking scared of me, doe eyes. For the record, I never said I wouldn't retaliate if you make me look stupid." With a squeak, Nanami took a noticeable step back. She raised her head higher and glared at him, trying to conceal her trembling. "See, come on, don't be so mean. You lost fair and square," she exclaimed. When Katsuki finally saw the white gauze covering her cheek, he scowled. He pointed to her cheek and said, "What the hell's with that? You get into a fight or something?" As she searched for an explanation, Nanami paused and started to perspire a little. It's nothing, I fell down, that's all. Sit down, I'm doing your hair now." With a frown, Katsuki reluctantly took a seat. Nanami stood behind him, grinned, and calmly started to comb his hair. The action was surprisingly soothing, and she smiled a little. His hair kept popping back into place, which annoyed her a little, but she was happy when it stayed down after she brushed it. She carefully ran her hand over the ends of his hair, finding them to be pleasantly soft. Nanami lowered his head while Katsuki gazed at his desk. He could feel her hands running through his hair, and his eyes drooped a little. The sensation was soothing, but he would never acknowledge it. "Hey, Yoshino-chan, what are you doing to Bakugo?" The sound of Kirishima entering and moving closer made Katsuki tense, according to Nanami. She hesitated, looking at the boy with the sharp teeth. Glancing back at Katsuki's hair, she started to tinker with it nervously. He chuckled and said, "Sorry, I know we haven't spoken before. I was just surprised." After pausing, Nanami resumed combing Katsuki's hair. Katsuki lost a bet with me, so I'm styling his hair as my prize," she grumbled. Kirishima smiled, and Katsuki felt an irk mark form on his head. Nanami pulled her comb on a knot in his hair, and he grunted, "Shut up, shitty hair." "I'm still sure she cheated." Ow. His next silence made her smile a little. Kirishima asked excitedly, "What hairstyle are you planning on giving him?" As he watched her smooth his hair, he smiled. Trying to keep his composure, he watched Katsuki almost vibrate in his seat. It's like watching an angry Pomeranian getting groomed. Katsuki yelled, "The fuck did you call me?" Kirishima chuckled and took a step back when the boy got to his feet, tiny explosions exploding from his hand. Nanami laughed and said, "Peefed, a Pomeranian, it suits him." The boys gazed at her, a little taken aback by her laughter. "Hey, sit down, Pommy, I'm almost done." Kirishima tried to hide his exploding laughter by covering his mouth. As Nanami pressed down on his shoulders to finish his hair, Katsuki gave an angry growl and did not fight back. She grasped the green ribbon and grinned. She debated whether or not to add the accessory as she stood in front of him. With his hair smoothed out, Katsuki already had a rather amusing appearance. Kirishima laughed and said, "Are you going to put a bow on top? That really sounds cute." "The fuck she is," Katsuki snarled, getting to his feet in retrenchment. "I mean, I wasn't, but now I'm gonna for sure." She smiled mischievously as she walked over to her classmate. "Come on, Pommy, we're almost done." "Don't fucking call me that. And get that damned thing away from me," he said. As the room filled with bewildered classmates, his hands exploded loudly. As Nanami closed in on the feisty teenager, they started to circle the two blondes. Many students encouraged Nanami after learning about the events, while others cautioned her to exercise caution. Katsuki sprang away from her in an instant. She laughed a little at the turn of events and ran after him. This probably would have ended by now if Kirishima hadn't entered. With his exceptional speed, Katsuki dashed to the opposite end of the classroom. "You're not putting that damned ribbon on me, Freckles." His high level of mobility deterred Nanami, who puffed out her cheeks. "Come on, Yoshino, don't let him get away," she saw. Glancing around, she saw Jiro and the other girls supporting her. "I'm eager to see what it will look like. Act quickly before Aizawa-sensei enters," exclaimed Kaminari. She heard Iida yell, "All of you stop this. This is unbecoming behavior of UA students." However, the words of encouragement from the others soon overpowered him. As Katsuki ran in his direction, Nanami blushed a little and glared at him. He abruptly veered off course and ran in the direction of his classmates, yelling at them to move aside while detonating explosives. Nanami leapt swiftly onto the desks, hopping and then doing a front flip to propel herself forward. She smiled and tucked her knees in as Katsuki gave her a startled look before she stepped onto his back with her left foot and pushed him down with her entire weight. She got him. After that, Nanami placed her knees on both of his arms and tied the ribbon around his head like bunny ears. As she tightened the knot, she gasped, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She saw Izuku entering and leapt to her feet as soon as he got close. "Nana," Katsuki growled softly, and she heard it. The freckled boy asked bewilderedly, "And Nanami, what is going on? What happened to Kachan?" He exclaimed, "You're fucking dead, Freckles." Izuku instinctively dragged Nanami behind him, but Kirishima, who was still beaming maniacally, intervened to separate the irate blonde from Izuku. "Hey Bakugo, you lost your bet fair and square. Don't go back on your word just because it's embarrassing. That's unmanly," he yelled. As he snapped a photo, Kaminari smiled. "This might be my new wallpaper." Nanami gave Izuku a small smile as she peered out from behind him. She smiled at her friend with freckles and said, "I dunno, Pommy. I think it looks kinda cute, don't you think, Izuku?" "Nanami, what is happening? Ah, what happened to your cheek?" Izuku responded. Concernedly, his hand touched the gauze. "Did you get hurt because of your quirk again?" She shook her head and tensed, blushing at the personal gesture. "Well, Aizawa's voice boomed angrily. "What are you guys doing? The class started 3 minutes ago. Sit down." The class quickly settled in, and Nanami contentedly sat next to Izuku while glancing at Katsuki, who was still furious. Wincing at the stinging sensation that met her cheek, she touched it. She glanced at Izuku as he started scrawling frantically in his notes. She sighed happily, anticipating her weary-looking teacher. Grandmother smiled a little, and I was thrilled to have some fun before class now that she was gone. She chuckled to herself and started taking notes, wondering if Izuku would notice the color of the ribbon I had selected. A group of reporters gathered in front of the school entrance, and Nanami blinked. Uncertain of how she would make it through, she hesitated. She observed how her classmates avoided questions by slickly navigating around them. As soon as a question was posed, she saw Izuku bolt. She mumbled, "All Might sure is popular." She started to circle the crowd in search of an entrance. Her gaze strayed to the side and landed on the body of a lanky, crusty-looking creature. She came to a halt and noticed that she was staring. Their skin was so dry and unhealthy that it looked yellow, and their hair was a dirty teal color. When their eyes locked, Nanami instantly turned away, feeling instantly threatened. "Who is that? So shady, perhaps I ought to report them." When she turned to face them once more, the individual was gone. Shivers went down Nanami's back. That was strange. The warning bell rang, and she turned back to the reporters, sighing, "I must have imagined it." She squeaked out, "Excuse me, I have to get to class, I'll be late," and started to push her way through the crowd. They pounced as soon as they saw her. "You're in the hero course, right? What is All Might like? What does he teach you at UA?" Nanami soon felt overpowered by the conversation. His teaching methods are." Nanami started to shake, as if she had forgotten the meaning of words. Excuse me." She attempted to pass them, but they wouldn't let her through, apparently thinking she was easy prey because she was so timid. "Just one answer, kiddo. Come on." She tugged at her hair and looked down, trying not to cry from nervousness. She was obscured by a taller person. When she looked up, Todoroki's back was there. "If you haven't realized, you're scaring her. Please let us through," he said with a stern voice. A female reporter stepped forward with excitement. "Aren't you the number 2 hero's son?" What are Endeavor's thoughts on his son being taught by his greatest rival? She inquired. Nanami held onto Todoroki's sleeve and tugged on it a little in an attempt to soothe him as he glared at the woman. Nanami and Todoroki turned to see an agitated Katsuki, saying, "Oh my fucking god, get out of the damn way." He pushed his way through the crowd and approached the two of them. "What the hell are you two doing standing here like idiots? You're all blocking the fucking entrance," he screamed wildly. Oh, you're the boy from the sludge monster incident." Katsuki's anger was boiling, and Nanami and Todoroki slowly withdrew. The blonde's head got an irk mark. But instead of attacking, he simply took Nanami by the wrist and pulled her violently through the crowd, with a silent Todoroki in tow. He held her in a somewhat painful grip, but Nanami didn't complain. "Let that fucking story die already." As she observed the students surrounding her enthusiastically discussing their desire to serve as the class representative, Nanami hummed. Although she wasn't interested in the position, she thought it was endearing how enthusiastic her classmates were. His remark about shorter skirts worried everyone, with the exception of Mineta. "Halt. This unruliness will get us nowhere. I say we have a vote to determine who is most worthy of the role," Iida yelled. However, as he raised his hand to the highest, he was trembling. Nanami gave a small smile before glancing at her Pomeranian doodle. She gave Katsuki a quick look. She said nonchalantly, "Pommy, do you really want to be the class representative?" He said simply, "Don't fucking call me that." Nanami gave an eye roll. "Sorry, I just can't see what you could contribute as class rep." She looked at Izuku, ignoring the irate growl she had received. The boy's hand was only slightly up. Instead of showing a sincere desire to be the class president, it appeared as though he had been carried away by the momentum. With a slight smile, Nanami jabbed her green-haired companion in the side. He turned and gave her a small smile. With a tilt of her head, she said, "Izuku, do you want me to vote for you?" Izuku stiffened and chuckled a little while dismissively waving a hand. You should vote for whoever you think is the best. You know, the most qualified." He said, "No, not just because we're friends." Nanami twirled her fringe around her finger and gave him a gentle smile. She tapped her pen on her desk and closed her eyes, saying, "I guess that's fair. Most qualified," she said, raising an eyebrow as she observed Iida's unpredictable actions. Jiro exclaimed, "Hey, Yoshino, you'll vote for me, right?" Nanami's head cocked. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, saying, "I've already decided who I'm voting for. He's clever and eccentric, and I think it's an obvious choice." Jiro gave Izuku a quick glance before grinning knowingly. She whispered, "Would it be your crush boy?" Nanami waved her hands frantically, flushed deeply. "I'm voting for Iida-kun, not Izuku." The girl with the black hair smiled. As Nanami ended up outing herself, her face turned a deeper shade of red. "Funny, I didn't say Midoriya, did I?" she asked. Izuku gave them a sidelong glance, turning away when Jiro gave him a quick glance. Nanami fiddled with her food while nervously glancing at the boy with the green hair next to her. He hadn't looked her in the eyes since the election. Pulling at her hair, Nanami frantically searched her memory for a point that might have enraged the boy. Izuku exclaimed frantically, "Lunch Rush's food seems to be getting better every day, right guys?" He talked to Iida and Uraraka over his meal, avoiding her eyes. Nanami scowled. "What did I do that he won't look at me?" She pondered worriedly. She gazed thoughtfully at the egg on top of her bowl of ramen. "Everything seemed to be going well when we last spoke, which was prior to the election. This can't be because I voted for Iida-kun, can it? No, that sounds incorrect. Not that Izuku is a petty person." She brought the egg to her mouth. After that, things became strange. Her eyes grew wide, and she splashed her egg into her bowl. With varying looks of surprise on their faces, the group gazed at her. Uraraka cautiously said, You okay, Yoshino-chan?" Nanami's eyes were wide and her face was flushed as she gazed at her ramen. "This began following my chat with Jiro-chan." She glanced tentatively at Izuku. He awkwardly maintained her gaze for a moment before turning to his pork cutlet, his cheeks flushing a gentle pink. In horror, Nanami began to shudder. He listened to us. "Abort. God, please." She got to her feet suddenly, trying to look normal with a blank smile. She fled, leaving her friends in a state of complete confusion. "Excuse me, I need to go mow my carpet." "Yeah. That. Bye," she exclaimed. Iida watched the anxious girl and said, mow her carpet? Is that a new slang I'm unaware of?" She collided with the wall next to the door, then covered her nose and fled. She dashed into the girl's bathroom and, before closing her eyes, checked under each stall to make sure she was alone. She took a single breath, closed her eyes, and tugged at her hair. She exclaimed, "Oh my God, I'm so stupid." She repeatedly struck her head against the wall. He is aware. He is aware. She knelt down and held her head. I knew he liked her, so I was just going to stand by him and Uraraka-san without ever telling him, but now he knows. Her mind raced. She whimpered, "He won't even look at me." She bit her lip and pulled at her hair, fighting the urge to cry. She shook her head, asking, "Does this mean I was rejected?" "It does, of course. You knew he liked someone else. You had the audacity to like him despite knowing that." "Don't cry, Nanami. You don't deserve it." Self-reprimanding, she said. Nevertheless, the girl got up, moved into the stall that was farthest away from the door, and sat down in resignation. Leaning back, she gazed up at the ceiling. She was experiencing a lot of emotions at once, and none of them were enjoyable. A quiet voice called out, "Excuse me. Oh, I apologize, but this stall is already taken." Nanami whispered to herself. I was here the whole time. Are you okay, Nanami-chan?" The familiar voice made Nanami tense. Quietly, "Hagakure-chan," she said. A sound of confirmation reached her ears. Her face flushed with shame, she muttered, "Ah, sorry that you had to see that." The girl who could not be seen asked, "Did something happen?" Outside the stall, Nanami noticed her shoes. Quietly, "Will you come out?" she said. She sighed and left the stall, saying, "Yeah, I may as well." Gazing at the floating uniform before her, she took a deep breath. She sighed, "My crush knows how I feel now." When Nanami didn't hear back, she interpreted it as her classmate telling her to go on. She started crying as she said aloud, "I'm unlucky, so it wouldn't be fair for me to have a boyfriend. They'd always get into some kind of a mess, so I wasn't going to tell him." She wiped her eyes while trying to maintain a steady voice. But he found out because Jiro-chan and I weren't very quiet when we were talking," she said. "And now he won't look at me. And I know he likes someone else, so I shouldn't have liked him anyway. I was setting myself up, and..." When she felt Hagakure embrace her, she stopped. Hagakure placed her hands on the sobbing blonde's shoulders and said, "Sorry, but you really seem to need a hug. It'll be okay. Look, maybe this boy is just shy, and he doesn't know what to think. You won't know unless you tell him properly." What? "But, Nanami-chan, it's already all out there. The only way to get past this is to confront it, and if he rejects you, that's that. But you won't feel better if you don't find out for sure. As of now, it sounds like you're just assuming." She released Nanami and turned to gaze. Nanami blushed at how accurate her guess was. "There's plenty of time left. You should tell him right now. It's Midoriya-kun, right? You're always with him. He's polite, so he'll definitely hear you out." As Nanami appeared to consider her guess, Hagakure's hold on her shoulders relaxed. "Unless it's Bakugo-kun. Maybe you should just let things simmer down if it's Bakugo-kun." Her face was touched. "I don't think my heart can handle it right now," she said. As she gazed in the mirror, she muttered, "Plus my face is probably all puffy." Hagakure examined the girl's apologetic state while placing a hand to her chin. She jumped with excitement and said, "Yeah. Maybe you should wait until tomorrow or something. Let yourself calm down. Get out all that frustration. We'll be training today somewhere special." Aizawa-sensei said, so for now, forget about boys, and let's focus on being a hero." Nanami gave a small smile. She saw the sleeve of Hagakure being held up to her. She furrowed her brows, extended her hand, and paused to look at the girl. She took Hagakure's hand and realized that there was absolutely no way to tell whether or not she was nodding. After guiding her to the sink, the invisible girl used a handkerchief soaked in cold water to wipe her face. As she was escorted out of the bathroom, Nanami let out a quiet sigh. Head lowered, she followed Hagakure as they walked to her table. They passed Izuku and the others on foot. As soon as their gazes locked, Nanami's cheeks began to burn. She turned away as she was gently pulled away, fighting the urge to cry again. Izuku gazed at his cutlet bowl while he pursed his lips. Uraraka gazed at her curly-haired friend while swallowing her rice. The abrupt tension between the two teenagers unnerved her. She asked directly, "Deku-kun, did you and Yoshino-chan have a fight?" Izuku shook his head and stiffened. "No, it's nothing," he promptly stated. He started gobbling up his food. "I believe I brought Nanami to tears." Shamefully, he thought. While sitting on the bus, Nanami fidgeted with her bouncy balls. She found herself sitting next to Katsuki, while Jiro and Hagakure sat behind them. As she recalled her lunch, her mind was confused. She pushed it to the back of her mind with a quiet sigh and closed her eyes. She couldn't even be ashamed of her hero costume because she was so stressed. Hey Yoshino-chan, what do you use those balls for? When Nanami glanced to the side and noticed a girl with pink skin and hair staring at her with excitement, she jumped. You used them against Uraraka, right? I've been so curious as to why you have so many. Oh, Ashido-san she waved a small blue ball around. She glanced at the ecstatic pinkette and said, they're weapons, I had them color-coded so I don't mix them up. I asked the support department to make them for me since I don't have a quirk that can do direct damage to people. She held up the blue ball. She put it away and took out a red one, saying, this is a smoke bomb. She produced a white one and said, these ones are filled with pepper spray and mace. This is just a normal bouncy ball, though it's harder than the ones you'd get at the store. I have some others, but I'll probably just use these mainly. The class turned to Kirishima and said, oh, hey, that's pretty clever, making up for what you lack, huh? I know the feeling. My quirk is strong, but it's not very flashy. I always worry I won't get noticed. Midoriya added, but it's still a great quirk for a pro, Kirishima-kun. But if we're talking flashy and powerful, you can leave out Todoroki and Bakugo, the blonde said. With an expressionless face, Tsuyu pointed to Katsuki and remarked, Bakugo-chan is always angry, so I doubt he'll be popular. What the fuck? You wanna say that to my face, frog girl? See? Nanami leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes, fighting the urge to laugh. As Nanami pretended to sleep, Katsuki angrily shook her arm and yelled, Nana! Fucking tell her, I'm going to be the number one. Hey, I know you're faking it, wake the hell up and tell her. Kaminari remarked, Bakugo, let the girl sleep, it's a long ride. Besides, it's pretty telling that we've only known you for a short time and we can tell your personality is like a hot turd steaming in rotting sewage, he responded. What did you say? I'll kill you, peeved, snorted Nanami. When she became aware that her facade had been exposed, she flushed. Katsuki shook her shoulder angrily and growled, I knew you were faking. As the explosive blonde yelled at Nanami, she couldn't help but laugh. As he bellowed at her and the other pupils, she raised her hands defensively in an attempt to contain her laughter. Ashido and Kirishima quickly joined her, while other students were reluctant to make any more jokes about him. Ashido laughed and said, you know, Bakugo, you're a lot less scary when you're around Yoshino-chan. Are you two dating? The students immediately fell silent while they awaited the response. Nanami glanced at Izuku, who was just staring at the two blondes, as her cheeks turned a fiery red. Pulling at her hair, she wished fervently to vanish. She turned to face Katsuki, who appeared prepared to leap over the seats and hurl the girl for making such a question. It seemed that it had become her duty to calm the boy down. No, we're just friends, she began nervously. At Katsuki, who was currently wearing an odd expression, she narrowed her eyes. I don't know what makes you think he's different when he's around me. He seems as foul-mouthed and vulgar as usual. When Katsuki heard his classmates laughing, he developed an irk mark on his head. Ashido tilted her head and said, oh, sorry about that. Guess I jumped to conclusions. I don't know, something's just different when you two are together. He seems less menacing, she chuckled. Tsuyu studied the two blondes, putting a finger to her chin. It's probably because you're so polite and reserved, Nanami-chan. When someone like you isn't fazed by Bakugo-chan's outbursts, he doesn't seem as intimidating, she said bluntly. Yeah, that's it, it's like a big angry dog that's friends with a fluffy little bunny, Uraraka responded. He put one foot on the rail in front of them and yelled, are you guys trying to pick a fight? I'll fucking end you. Nanami took hold of his shirt's back. In a desperate attempt, she said, Pommy, come on, it's not that serious. Angry, Aizawa yelled, settle down, I'm trying to sleep, we'll be there shortly, so quit getting so riled up. Katsuki reluctantly took a seat. Uncertain whether he would simply jump over the seats and blow up the bus, Nanami reluctantly let go of his shirt. She sat down and closed her eyes once she was certain that everything was under control. Katsuki lowered his hand slightly and gave her a quick glance. When Nanami felt something encircling her pinky, her eyes popped open. She noticed that Katsuki's pinky was gently gripping hers as she looked down. She glanced at her phone at that precise moment. Make sure you tell me who made you cry earlier at lunch. That makeup on your face isn't fooling anyone. I'll kick their ass. And don't fucking call me Pommy. Nanami glanced at her seatmate and arched an eyebrow. Instead of making eye contact, he turned his head away and stared out the window. His leg bounced wildly, and his face appeared irritated. Nanami couldn't suppress a small smile. After putting her pinky around his, she closed her eyes and took a quick nap. When Katsuki gave her a violent shoulder shrug, causing her head to bounce, Nanami snorted in surprise, and Todoroki suppressed the urge to laugh. She wiped her mouth and flushed, grateful that her saliva didn't land on the fiery blonde. As she and the other pupils disembarked from the bus, she rubbed her eyes. When she almost fell asleep on her feet, Katsuki pinched her, causing her to yell. Todoroki frowned at being treated so roughly. Nanami complained as she rubbed her arm, and based on Shoji's startled look at the small girl, he assumed she was using a profanity. When Todoroki gestured for her to join him without saying anything, she turned to the side and grinned. She turned to face Bakugo and protruded her tongue. She walked slowly to Todoroki and stood on his right side, folding her arms. The boy, who was extremely hot, gazed at Nanami's face. Even though the girl wore makeup, anyone who looked could see that she had been crying, and the bruise on her face was barely visible. He scowled and wondered whether her grandmother had been the source of the disturbing scene. Before he stopped when the lights went out, his eyes narrowed and he extended a hand to her. His mind was racing with confusion as he glanced around. When he saw a black vortex forming and multiple individuals with different peculiarities entering, his eyes widened. Above all, a gremlin with a crusty appearance and human hands covering his body. It's him," she whispered, and Todoroki heard. He tensed at the girl's terrified expression as he looked down at her. Aizawa put on his goggles and assumed a fighting stance. 13. Protect the children, stay back, this is all real. Those are villains. With his eyes narrowing, Todoroki edged toward Nanami as a deep voice reverberated throughout the USJ. The only real heroes I see here are Eraserhead and 13. Curious, isn't All Might supposed to be here? According to the schedule we retrieved, he was supposed to be present as well. As he raised his arms and looked around, the handsy gremlin started talking. His red eyes seemed to focus on Nanami. Where is he? The symbol of peace. We brought so many people who wanted to meet him, he said. Maybe if I kill a few kids, he'll show up. As Nanami looked directly into the villain's eyes, she trembled and pulled at her hair. She squeaked, I saw him, he was here. Todoroki gave her a quick glance before turning to face the gaunt man. Is the whole campus being attacked or is it just the USJ? Either way, there's most likely someone in there with a quirk that can jam the alarm signals. Choosing this secluded place while a class is in session, they're fools but they must have a concrete objective, he said. As he continued to evaluate the situation, he felt his temperature dropping. 13. Get them out of here and alert the main campus. Actually, they might have jammed our communications too. Kaminari, try to contact the school with your quirk. Aizawa gave the order. As he readied himself for what lay ahead, his binding scarf started to move. What are you going to do, sensei? You can't take them all on your own. Your quirk isn't suited for this kind of fight, Midoriya yelled. His straightforward response was, you can't be a pro if you only have one trick. He then leapt to the ground and started to battle the crowd by himself. Nanami felt Todoroki's hand on her shoulder. She gave him a nod before bolting for the door. He frowned, questioning whether this was the right thing for them to do. The black mist had moved in front of them, so the thought was short-lived. Change POV as Nanami gazed at the enormous mass before her, her knees gave way. God, the League of Villains. This could have been avoided by me. She turned back to face the hand-covered villain in the middle. There he was, the leader, however, I foolishly chose not to report it, if I had simply. The mist man suddenly grew and sucked them up, widening her eyes. Todoroki grabbed her arm roughly and yanked her toward him as she yelled. She buried her face in his chest, closed her eyes, and desperately attempted to keep her strangeness from getting worse. She let out a yelp as she and Todoroki abruptly dropped to the landslide zone's unstable ground. She slipped to the bottom of the hill, landing on her back and bottom, and shrieked. As Todoroki slid down coolly, she looked back and rubbed her butt. Without a word, he helped her up and looked at the terrain. Nanami. The abrupt use of her first name startled her. She turned back to face him. He said softly, if you're afraid, you can leave it all to me. Okay. I'll freeze any villains that come our way all at once. Nanami cast her gaze downward. She reached into her utility belt and took out a small pair of binoculars, her knees trembling. As she approached the pile of dirt, she looked at her classmate with a tentative smile. Todoroki observed with admiration as she swiftly negotiated her way to the summit of the landslide. He observed her surveying the area before watching below for any surprise attacks. The ice power of Todoroki-kun is insane. He is truly amazing. When she saw the villains emerging from their hiding place, she lowered her binoculars. He could easily defeat any villain that came our way in a single blow, but I can also help. Like Eraserhead, I will be. She produced a mixture of red and blue bouncy balls and snatched up her slingshot, saying, "My quirk isn't suited for combat, but I'll fight. I'm going to be like Izukun. I refuse to be a burden because of my disadvantage." Pulling the elastic band, she took aim. She released it, saying, "I'll be a hero." She saw the balls strike their target and explode as soon as they touched down. The approaching enemies were momentarily rendered inoperable by the smoke and mace combination. Got them. After hearing the agonized screams, Todoroki glanced up at his classmate as she slid down. "Not bad," was his compliment. Nanami excitedly ran up to him. "I may be unlucky, but my aim is always on point." As the angry and now weeping villains ran toward them, Todoroki kept his gaze forward and then drew her behind him. He stepped forward with his right foot, freezing the villains except for their faces. The air dropped around them, and Nanami shivered. In her tiny hero suit, her exposed skin gradually started to feel like pins and needles. She shook her head and followed him through the now frozen villain's path. Glancing back at her, Todoroki grabbed her hand with his left and heated her body. The much-needed warmth made her sigh. This power. He isn't a student, he's an M-monster. Nanami frowned as she touched each statue as she passed the villains, glancing at them. As she went, tiny shards of bad luck were dispersed. As she squeezed Todoroki's hand, she felt a wave of calmness sweep over her as she glanced at his back. "Nanami," he said. She replied with a hum. He put his hand on his right cheek and said, "This is a bad time," but, without turning to face her, he said clumsily, "That bruise you're trying to hide, was that your grandmother?" The question was met with a deadpan from Nanami. Her smile was dry as she pulled at her hair. The way he flinched made her laugh. "Wow, you have about as much tact as a rock sometimes, Todoroki-kun." She yelled as he pulled her behind him, bringing her face to face with a villain who had suddenly frozen. "I guess I should have put on a thicker layer. We can talk about this later, okay? For now we have to get out of here." "Holy." She glanced back, almost glaring at the frozen pipe that Todoroki was still holding. As the temperature dropped once more, the sensation of pins and needles returned. As he spoke to the villain, Todoroki looked at her and wrapped his left arm around her to keep her warm. He moved closer to one of the villains while holding Nanami close. "Now, your cells will slowly die as you succumb to frostbite and hypothermia. Luckily for you," he said. "I want to be a hero and would like to avoid such an outcome. Now if you'd like to save yourself, you'll tell me your plan, and how you intend on killing All Might." Nanami looked up at him, observing her classmate's icy manner with dismay. She pursed her lips at the villain's tears as she gave him a quick glance. Todoroki tightened his hold on her as she shivered and nuzzled closer to him. "I wonder if that's from my mace or if he's actually scared," she thought. "I feel kind of unnecessary right now." Todoroki suddenly dragged her along with him. He disregarded her questions and concentrated only on moving forward. She had to keep up with his pace, almost tripping over her own feet. Somehow, as he slid on his own ice for speed, she had been pulled onto his back. With a sense of dread brewing in the pit of her stomach, Nanami continued to look straight ahead. As soon as Todoroki stopped and put her down, it became evident why. In the distance, Nanami caught a glimpse of Tsuyu, Mineta, and Izuku carrying a broken and bloody Aizawa. Her attention, however, was on a bleeding All Might. He was in what appeared to be a reverse suplex due to a terrifying, nightmare-fueled creature. As the hero was lowered into a warp gate, the creature held him tightly. Nanami appeared unable to flee, and his eyes widened in horror. "All MIMMPH, she started, but her companion picked her up again after slamming his hand over her mouth. Todoroki dashed to a pile of big rubble and put her down, out of sight. With his eyes fixed on the scene in front of them, he placed his hands on her shoulders. "Stay here. Don't get in the way." Then he rushed into the battle to help. As she watched, the strongest member of the class barely stopped at the hand holding All Might, freezing half of the creature's body. As she examined her pouch, Nanami pondered how she could possibly help. She pulled her hair back. She ignored the pain and kept pulling despite it. Might leapt out of the villain's clutches. Although she was unable to hear what they were saying, she could tell by the hero's expression that everything would be okay. Her gaze focused on the bloodstain on his shirt, even though she wanted to believe it. As the fight started, her breathing became erratic and her chest tightened. In an attempt to relax, she knelt down and closed her eyes. No, not right now. All Might has arrived, she thought. Everything is fine. Don't lose control, don't spread it. She placed her hands on her chest and frantically dug her fingernails into the material of her shirt while crying. Why am I feeling so uneasy about this? As she watched, she could barely keep up with the speed at which the blonde hero's fists collided with the beast. Like there's a problem. Her hand started to tremble. No, she saw a tiny purple mist start to spread out of her hand. She muttered to herself, I can see it, that's not good. Stop, she rummaged through her pouch frantically, took out the stone her father had given her, and gave it everything she had. All Might roared, a real hero always finds a way for justice to be served, or something similar. With steam rising from his body, he drew his fist back and said, it's time for a lesson. You've probably heard this phrase before, but I'll show you what it really means, go beyond. Plus. Ultra. As the beast crashed through the ceiling, everyone in the USJ watched. As he passed through the clouds, they began to split. The number one hero was surrounded by rising smoke, and there was silence. Nanami watched him, slowly approaching, and listening from a few meters away from the action while concealed behind a big pile of rubble. When she heard it, she scowled. He was making fun of the previous gremlin. She started to panic, and her energy started to leak out once more. He's just standing there, but why? There's a problem. The man who attempted to murder his students wouldn't be mocked by All Might, would he? In order to prevent him from posing a threat to others, he would eliminate him, or at the very least render him unconscious. She turned to face the antagonist. As he scratched nervously at his neck, becoming increasingly agitated, her nerves jumped. Progressively more hazardous. She looked at her classmates, who all appeared to be unaware of it, with the exception of Izukun. The always perceptive student was unable to move. He seemed to know something that nobody else did. Nanami's attention was on the hero. Her gaze expanded. All Might was trembling and not moving at all. The sight of blood dripping from his mouth made her squint and go pale. As Nanami's misfortune started to seep out, the villain started to scratch at his neck more violently. Shigaraki Tamura, do not fret. Look at him, he is weakened. Nomu's attacks were effective. The children are frozen in fear, and our underlings are rising. We have a chance. If we work together we can win, the Misty Mass persuaded. We can still kill All Might. Shigaraki stopped scratching and paid attention to what his companion was saying. Yes, you're right Kurogiri, this is it. The end boss is right here. His hands were out to attack as he dashed forward. Izuku was moving at that very moment. As he readied his assault, his legs hung uselessly. Shigaraki's outstretched hand was now in Izuku's path as Kurogiri's mist grew and warped. Nanami's shelter collapsed with a crash, engulfing her in a gentle purple mist as her misfortune destroyed its stability. As she ran and drew back her slingshot, she filled her ammo to overflowing with bad luck. All eyes were on her. Don't touch him, she yelled, instantly firing twice. A blue ball burst into a cloud of smoke, and a red ball struck Shigaraki in the face. With one hand frantically clawing at his face with the other, the crusty villain flinched back and pulled his hand back slightly. The powerful mace bomb had caused tears to fall down his cheeks. Izuku was tackled away from the villain by her as she leapt. Whirling around, she stood up and waited for the smoke to subside. Nanami, Izuku moaned at the end. She looked back at him with a scared smile on her face, her knees trembling. It's okay, she said. She pulled out a purple ball and pointed it at the barely discernible silhouette in the smoke, saying, You aren't alone. I'm here, Izukun. With a growl, Shigaraki ran toward her and held out his hand. You little brat, I'll enjoy wrapping my hands around your neck. As he got closer, Nanami clenched her jaw and drew the slingshot back. Despite the smoke, a bullet went through the villain's hand as a gunshot rang. The experts were here. As soon as they were on the bus, Nanami left her classmates, choosing to take a seat alone in the rear. She gazed at her hand, observing the tiny traces of purple smoke swirling around it. Frustrated, she knitted her eyebrows together. Is it because of the stress from what just happened, or has it never gotten to the point where I can see it? She reached for her stone and focused, giving it all of her energy. She sighed in relief at the absence of smoke and glanced at her hand, wondering if I had really helped anyone. Hey, so I was totally wrong with my guesses about who you were into, right? The headless uniform sitting in front of Nanami made her jump. Hagakure-chan. The invisible girl whispered, I was in the landslide zone with you and Todoroki-kun. After leaning in. In her seat, she watched the floating uniform dance. It was him, right? But he seemed super into you. And here I was thinking it was Midoriya or Bakugo. She said. You guys were holding hands and were being all cuddly. A man and a woman in a dire situation, It was just so cute. With a deep flush, Nanami reclined in her chair. She looked around to check if her friends were paying attention. She hushed the girl before her in a hurry. She looked at her hand and whimpered when she saw the purple mist coming out of it once more. Shush. It's not Todoroki-kun. It's not, she said. Hagakure-chan I want to be alone, is that alright? After watching the invisible girl stumble, she left to sit somewhere else. Nanami clenched her fists tightly, leaned her head against the window, and closed her eyes. Drops of perspiration trickled down her head. Lock it up. Don't let it spread. She felt a burning sensation in her hand as it tensed. She tried to remain calm, but her breathing was labored. Perhaps Principal Nezu would know what to do. In an attempt to blend in, she sank into her chair. Change POV. Izuku turned to face Nanami, his eyes gentle with worry. The last person he had anticipated coming to his aid was the small girl. She averted her eyes, the guilt of causing her to cry more intense than before. What disturbed him most, though, was the way she isolated herself and continued to stare at her hand, even chasing Hagakure away. With hesitation, he walked toward the blonde, ignoring Kachan's glaring stare as he passed. He took the seat across from her. He hesitated, then looked back at her after staring at his lap. Quietly, he called, Nanami, Izukun, not now, please, she gasped softly. He reached for her, but she recoiled when he said, Nanami, did you get hurt during the attack? He looked at her hands and noticed a strange smoke hanging over them. He extended his hand to take hers. What is that? Are you okay? Nanami swiftly slapped his hand away as her eyes widened and he experienced a stinging pain. Don't touch me, she yelled. The teens sensed that someone was watching them as the bus abruptly went silent. Nanami flinched back and tucked herself deeper into her chair, lowering her head to avoid his stare. She mumbled, please, Izuku, just leave now. The absence of N in his name made Izuku wince. His eyes strayed to her now shaking hand. Initially hovering above her hand in a circle like clouds, the smoke was now moving wildly. Nanami covered the smoke with her hand and appeared to be in pain as she attempted to control it. They remained silent while the blonde shuddered. He noticed that she was acting strangely. Isn't she concerned that it will spread? To the annoyance of Iida, who insisted that everyone refrain from rising from their seats, he stood. Izuku returned to his old seat, giving the blonde one last look. He sat with his eyes fixed on Nanami. Nanami, what's going on with you? Todoroki waited outside Principal Nezu's office, staring at the floor. Even though the school day had been cancelled because of the attack, a frail-looking Nanami hurried into the school as soon as the bus had stopped and opened its doors. It unnerved him because he had never seen the girl's face so intensely before. Though he knew better than to storm in after her, he had followed her. He was left standing outside the doors for a while because the principal was, of course, out looking into the incident at the USJ. Until the appearance of the anthropomorphic principal, Nanami did not appear to be planning to leave. He pondered whether he should text the girl or talk to her. In order to avoid shocking her, he finally pulled out his phone and chose to text. Nanami, Principal Nezu won't be in for a while. You should head home before your parents worry. His phone pinging on its own. The phone number you are attempting to contact is not in service. He knocked on the door and scowled. Nanami, did you not pay for your phone service? Before the shy girl responded, there was a pause. Her quiet reply was, my phone stopped working shortly after I picked it up. He touched the doorknob but did not attempt to open it, saying, you should go home. Your parents are probably worried about you. I managed to text them that I needed to speak to the principal before my phone broke. They're not happy but they understand. You need to leave Todoroki-kun. I'm not safe to be around right now. A weight pressed against the door as he scowled, turned the knob, and pushed it. With firmness, he said, Nanami. She seemed to be leaning against the door, he thought. He attempted to open the door once more but got the same response. What are you talking about? He heard her voice quivering and pushed harder on the door. My quirk is being weird. I can see it now, and I'm doing all I can to control it. It's probably because of all this sudden stress and anxiety. This has never happened before. Principal Nezu is insanely intelligent, so I was hoping he could help me. She chuckled darkly. It burns. I don't know why, but my hand feels like it's on fire. When Todoroki heard the obvious fear in her voice, his face darkened. Nanami, I'm giving you the option. Let me in, or I'll force the door open. He tried to open the door, but there was a pause, and now there was no resistance. Nanami had fled to the opposite side of the room when he intervened. She held her hand down, and he could just make out the purple mist covering it. She gestured. Stop. with her outstretched hand when he tried to approach her. With a pained expression on her face, she looked at her hand and said, "Please don't. I don't want it to spread to you. I don't know if it's stronger now or if it just looks like this. You might get hurt." Todoroki approached her with a scowl. Knowing full well that she had nowhere else to go as she pressed against the wall, he stopped in front of her and said, "I'll be fine." He held out his right hand and said, "Let me see your hand." Nanami paused and gazed at his hand. He gave her a blank look when she peered up at him through her bangs. She extended her hand toward him, but as the smoke started to warp as she got closer, she quickly withdrew it. The smoke danced violently over her hand, and Todoroki scowled. She was shocked when he reached out and grabbed it. As soon as he used his quirk, a soft frost appeared on it. The burning in her hand subsided, and her shoulders relaxed. He kept his temperature constant, and his face remained unchanged. He rubbed his thumb on her palm and looked at the smoke, asking, "You said you think it happened because of stress, right?" He watched it gradually fade away. "If you calm down and relax, it'll probably settle down," he said. He raised his head to meet her gaze. "I hate to admit it, but I learned this from my bastard of a father. When you lose control, you just need to stop and breathe. Stay calm and don't let it control you." Nanami whispered, But it's never done this before." The sight of the smoke fading, however, calmed her. Todoroki's gaze shifted to the ceiling. He tilted his head in her direction and asked, "That's probably scary, right?" He noticed that the sun was starting to set outside the window and said, "But it's up to you whether or not you let it beat you, isn't it?" He scowled, repositioned his hand, and escorted her out of the office. "It's getting late. I'm taking you home." Nanami touched her shoulder to his arm, squeezed his hand, and moved closer to him. There was absolutely no resistance. She allowed him to lead her off school property with her eyes half closed. He gave her hand a light squeeze while continuing to look straight ahead.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.